Welcome, Immortalites, to another conversation. A couple of days ago, I had on my friend Alexander Watanabe, who first appeared in conversation number 76. If you want his backstory, as usual, it was wide-ranging. So we were talking about the Perfect NFT, his new art project, which is the self-reflection of the Ponzi-like hype nature of the NFT scene. We talked about the differences between architecture and engineering, about the digital nomad lifestyle and of not particularly fitting in anywhere, of some Japanese books. We talked about why I don't give girls flowers. There is very many things that we go on here. So I do hope you enjoy this conversation.
So what's happened between I released Gucci. That was really fun with my co-founder Walj, who did all the smart contracts for that. Didn't really work out commercially. We had some good users, whatnot, and I think our heart's not really in, I don't know, like the NFT business side of things. So
Yeah.
that's basically pivoted into what we're calling compact, which is with a K because we're poor people who don't want to buy expensive domain names. So it's KOMPACTIO, which is basically just a smart contract development venture, not venture, like a consultancy or whatever you want to call it. And we have like 4 or 5 clients now developing their smart contracts on Cardano because we did the Gucci smart contracts in like a week or two. And that seems kind of fundamentally different than how most stuff on Cardano ends up going, right? Where like there's an announcement and then a couple years later there's something that comes live.
Yeah.
And so kind of our learning from the whole Gucci thing was maybe the most valuable thing that we have is our ability to develop smart contracts quickly.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of a weird pivot. And it's also in a bear market, you'd rather sell shovels than go prospecting for gold,
For sure.
kind of thing. So that made sense. And my co-founder didn't have any. He basically worked in a bunch of startups without getting paid for a while. So it was good for him to get some money from things. So yeah.
Hey,
bringing the clients in there.
Yeah, I did actually want to ask you about Gucci because I really love the idea of it. And not even the shorting aspect per se, because I'm not that big a fan.
Hodls.
I more just the aspect of putting your money where your mouth is. If you really believe that you've got something that's worthwhile, and I can understand being concerned of something if you're unsure of the actual contracts and whatnot, of the validity of the code behind it. But it was definitely that aspect of if you really believe in something, you should be making money of it. What did you notice from the kind of like Gucci experiment? I guess were you, because you were thinking more people would be wanting to put it up, right? As in they have an NFT of some sort that they believe in, and they think it'll be worth more in the future, and so they would put it up, and then other people could short it, I guess.
Yeah, well, so I think mostly it was the UX was too complicated and had too many steps involved. You probably dealt with it, right? Like
I played around.
There's no actual short button anywhere on the site, right? So we were thinking about doing like this turbo bull or turbo bear, where basically what it would do is on Gucci you could make a short, but it involved like 3 or 4 steps. Like first you had to borrow someone's NFT, then you had to go sell it someplace else or use a hodl, then you had to rebuy it, then you had to send it back, right? Like, and I think to a certain extent, the average crypto user is looking for a more like one click, up or down kind of thing. And so one thing we had considered doing, but just fundamentally I don't think we want to be in the space, is like a one click borrow and sell. So at least you opened your position, right? Like if you borrowed an NFT, like an unsig, if you thought unsigs were shite, you borrowed it and instantly used a hodl, right? Then your short is opened. And you could even, if we had in that one click button, what price do you want to close your short at, right? We could make you a new hodl all in one click. And that'd be a borrow, use someone else's hodl, open your own hodl, and then you walk away. And if the hodl hits because the price of UNSIX goes down, you've essentially made your short, right? But I think the thing is that like even though most people are, I think, bearish on NFTs, like in the larger community or the larger human space,
Yeah.
They don't really seem to be interested in getting involved either in crypto or into the NFT space. Even if you're bearish on NFTs, like it's just like I'm not going to play in the space at all.
Yeah, for
right?
sure. That makes
And
sense to me.
so,
Yeah.
yeah,
You'd just be like, if you think it's worthless, like there's no point investing
yeah,
any energy to learn
yeah,
about it.
exactly, just like that kind of thing. And so, I think we could have done some things to make it easier to use, but one thing that I will try to address in the criticism is like some people have tried to attack me because like Gucci wasn't a commercial success, right? Like, oh, it's shit, blah blah blah. But like, have you never tried to do something that didn't exist and it didn't work out? Like, I don't understand what like if we had tried to raise money from people or if we had sold NFTs to people, all we did is like open up a lemonade stand on the corner. You drove by and you didn't like the lemonade that was being sold. Like, I really don't understand the Cardano community or some people in the Cardano community's kind of attitude toward Gucci of like, there's no harm, no foul, right? Like, we literally offered a new service that hadn't been offered anywhere in the world before. We chose to do it on Cardano. And then there's like a small but vocal contingent of the community who chooses to like use this as some kind of opportunity for criticism. Like, I just don't understand it, right? Like,
Yeah,
of
dude,
course,
there could be so many things wrapped up in that. It could be uh, personal, as in directed towards
yeah,
you,
yeah,
regardless of
yeah,
whatever it is. It could be the mentality of buying into something. And look, no one likes it. It's a hard feeling when you have to admit you've made a bad decision of a purchase of something. Lord knows
yeah.
I've had that plenty
Well,
of
I mean,
investments. Yeah,
we spent a bunch of time developing this thing, right? And it didn't
yeah,
really
of
pan
course.
out,
Yeah, exactly.
financially speaking, in terms of the product or service. I think what it kind of made me realize a bit was, I probably have had my fair share of criticism directed for like being too negative in the space. Um, and I kind of I view that as like you you have it's not that I'm a negative person, but I think you have to objectively look at the value of something and see like what is this doing for the space and or the world, and like is this worthwhile pursuing? And it does make sense to me. My grad school thesis partner, when I used to introduce our thesis, he's like, Alex, you cannot start your thesis presentation like we're not
On a
XYZ.
negative note, yeah.
Like, yeah, like by saying it like you have to like reframe this into a positive statement, right? Of
Yeah.
like, we are like IJK, we are not XYZ, right?
Yeah.
Like, even if you want to say that thing, but it is kind of my tendency, I think, to react to things a bit. Like, unsigs is not a link to a JPEG, right? Like, it is something else. And I think it's maybe my like dialectical, like post-communist thinking kind of thing, right? Of like, you have this thing and then you respond to the thing and you come up with a new thing, right? But I tend to kind of say like, I'm responding to this, right? I'm not a link to a JPEG, or I'm not about like wild speculation on links to JPEGs, right? But I think, yeah, for the vast majority of humanity, it makes sense to be more positive and build people up rather than help things fall down, even if those things need to fall down or should fall down or whatever, right?
Yeah, it's a balance in
So,
between them, right? And it's
yeah,
also just comes down to personality. And I generally think that almost naive optimism is probably one of the best mentalities to have.
Really?
Yeah.
I was deep breathing. I think it. I think it's a pretty successful life strategy, right? Or
Yeah.
it'll get you a decent way. And I think probably like I've witnessed my mother being taken advantage of by people because I would
Mm.
say she's naively optimistic and gullible, and
Yeah.
so a little bit of my skepticism and pessimism on things is a reaction to. I kind of think some people, my wife will hate me for like she's kind of like this angelic figure who is not made for this world,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Like she takes people at face value, trusts them, and then ends up getting fucked by these people who, you know, and I just think it's a very like childlike innocence way to go through the world.
Mm.
And if you can do that as a person and survive, more power to you. But I don't like seeing good people taken advantage of. And it's kind of motivated my whole anti NFT thing, right? I
Yeah.
don't know if you and I have talked about like she gets sucked into these MLM scams all the time, my
Gotcha.
mother. And
Multi-level
I'm like,
marketing. Yeah.
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 And I'm like, Jesus, mom, like, do you not understand? Like, you're not selling product. They are selling you a dream of hope and financial independence. And you're not selling magnetic bracelets that increase circulation. You're not selling cosmetic. You're selling a dream to other people who are similarly have like no options and hope in life. And you're preying on these people. And I don't like, my mom's pretty good at it because she's a social person, unlike me. And she can make, 5 to 10 grand a month doing these MLM things for the first month or two before she runs through, and gets jaded and
Yeah.
saturates the market with a thing. And I'm like, but even though you can do that, like you realize you're kind of stealing from people. Like it's amoral for you to sell the stuff that you can do well, but everyone you're signing up is not going to do well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you didn't know that, you know that now because I'm telling you, like 99% of the people you get involved in this shit are going to lose money.
Mm.
And that's kind of what I see in the NFT space is like I hate it when I go into like an NFT Discord, which I try not to do as much as possible. And they're like, "Oh, this NFT paid for my kid's college," or like they're selling these like lifestyle aspirations, and it's like it's really cringy to me that I think people prey on economically disadvantaged people and sell them hopes and dreams, and then like it's not really about the monkey JPEG or whatever, right? It's about what did this NFT do for me and my loved ones or whatever. And I think
Correct.
most of those
Yeah.
people saying that are not actually making any gains. They're just like bots or whatever.
Yeah, I suppose one of the things, maybe naive optimism is the wrong way of putting it. And I've got an example of how perhaps it's better. So I'd say I'm an extremely credulous person, and that is I take people on their face value. If and this gets me
Until proven wrong.
yeah, pretty much in humorous trouble with Juan all the time because he'll always be like, "Yeah, I'm going to be there in 15 minutes," and then he's like literally outside the door, or we'd be talking about someone who we haven't seen in 5 years. And he's like, "Oh yeah, I saw them the other day," and I'm like, "Oh really?" And he's like, "Yeah, they told me that you're an asshole or something." And I'm like, "What? They said that?" That's sort of just it's almost stretching the bounds. But then there's gullible, which is you believe extraordinarily like far out things, which are just they
Despite all evidence to the contrary, and
yeah
you should know better.
exactly.
I think that's right. I have a thing kind of similar. Whenever I go out to lunch with someone, I always pick up the tab the first time.
Yeah.
And it's just like because I hate this like habit of like splitting the thing. Because I think fundamentally, like humans do favors for each other and trade favors back and forth. It's this idea called like gift reciprocity.
Yep.
I do a thing for you, and you feel indebted to me, and so you kind of do something nice back for me. And even after that debt is paid, like we have a stronger connection,
For sure.
right? Like
Yeah.
because of the history of relationships that have passed. And I think that when you split the bill, there's no opportunity to become vulnerable. Like I'm out $8 because I paid for your lunch, right?
Yeah.
And then you don't make good on it. And so like it's a very silly way. Of course, there's other ways to build relationships, but I just like to see, uh, I'm always willing to risk $8 for a new relationship.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It means nothing to me.
And that's not silly at all. And
Yeah.
I suppose one of the things that is is maybe scary is when people will take advantage of that in a manipulative way. So that exact thing that you mentioned, I read this book called The Power of Habit. Was it Power of Habit? No, it was called Persuasion by Cialdini. It's a pretty famous like psychology book, and that's one of like the 7 things that he talks about in persuading people. It's actually kind of gifting and establishing this reciprocity. And if you do it in a kind of manipulative manner, you can actually kind of get people to
Get them. You start with something small, and
yeah,
then people feel like they have a track record, and then you increase the ask to a like a
exactly.
higher.
Yeah, exactly. So
Interesting.
if you were doing this and then asking for like a lobster meal at
Yeah,
the
yeah.
fanciest place in town afterwards, or suggesting that, that's where it's like, okay, no.
It's
But
yeah,
you're doing that. I do very much a similar thing with like just going out or having drinks on a
yeah,
date or with friends or
yeah.
a new friend or things like that. Yeah, sure. It's worth it for that extra that yeah. Honestly, for me, it's
It's like
just
I
as
think
much
it's making
logistics.
yourself vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. One is logistics. It's two. It's like it's just like I don't know, a classy thing to do, right? Like in Japanese we say kondo gote, like you get the next time kind of thing.
Yep.
And it's just like I just think it's fundamental how you build relationships. What I really like is this. If in a ledger I go -$8, and then you return me back to zero by paying for the next lunch, right?
Hmm.
I like that even though we're back at zero, there's this kind of interstitial thing. Like how does that represented? It's like length of transaction history or reputation or something. But even though we're at zero again in the balance book in the ledger, we're not at zero. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Right? Like
Yeah.
we have transcended and gone to, wow, you've paid me paid a lunch for me, bought me a lunch, right? And I like that this, even though it's like a net zero effect, there's something that was created there out of this economic exchange that is a net null,
Yeah.
right?
It's
Like if you paid $4 and I paid $4, and next time we each paid $4 again, like we're kind of back at the same place, but it's a very different outcome,
yeah. It's kind of
right?
like
Like every time I go out to lunch.
the circular economy, I guess, where
Mhm,
you scratch this person's back, they get it, and then
mhm,
it eventually comes around, or even like
mhm.
the aspect of karma, which tends to add on
Yeah.
extra things, which are guarantees or
Mhm.
stuff that's a little bit further out in terms of, and if you get to the real crazy end of it, I think that's more like the secret type manifesting sort of things if you go too far. Uh,
I had a Catholic friend in my first professional job outside of academia he's like, I'm not Catholic. I don't believe in God, but he's like, how do you raise children to be good people without God? And he personally didn't believe in God, but he
mm,
thought like God was a necessary figure to like instill morals in the children. And I thought that was really funny because I'm like, well, conversely, like how can you be a moral person if you think that the only reason to do good is to be rewarded in an afterlife?
mm,
Like that's not being good. That's like being a rational human being. Like if you tell me that if I do good things in this life for 70 years, I will have infinite good like reward for eternity.
mm,
Obviously, the rational thing to do is to be good, right?
yeah,
So I would argue like in that case, like it's only in the absence of an eternal reward that you can be an upstanding, morally correct person. Because do you get what I'm saying? Like you
yeah,
can
yeah.
actually do good because you're doing something without any anticipation of reward. Whereas, like, if I give you $100 and I know that you're going to give me infinite dollars, in 70 years, like that's I know that it's not bullshit, right? Like that's not being good. That's like being a rational actor.
Yeah,
And so I thought it was interesting to me that like some people would think that.
it's this reminds me of these people who are altruistic to this crazy degree where it's almost like they don't treat individuals as that kind of primary motivation. So you'll hear about someone who's like uber rich and then they decide to give it all away or something like that, but they don't give it in a manner which is directly to like supporting cancer patients or something like that. And instead they do it in a way which is maybe more sending it to someone across the opposite side of the world who they'll never get any personal benefit from it or things like this, and they don't tell anyone about it. Although, of course, like, how
Have
do
you
you
ever
find
seen
about this?
some Nigerian prince emails?
Yeah.
I've never heard of this. A fabulously wealthy person bestowing all their wealth randomly to another individual.
Well, it's not exactly that, but it's this aspect
Mhm.
where if someone does something where there isn't a kind of obvious way that they can get repaid for it in some sort
Kudos
of
or
kudos
something.
or social value or something like that, it's almost like it's like, oh, why are they doing that? That's kind of weird. It's almost they're almost like a robot, or they have no feelings or something like that. And so
Mhm.
you can see how it kind of gets flipped on its head, where if you go too
I think that's funny
altruistic.
because yeah, isn't it the opposite? Like I would assume that like if you donate a wing to a hospital or a university and get your name on it,
Mm.
like isn't that a bit peacocky? Like
Yeah, exactly. You're screwed
look
no
at
matter what,
my,
man.
you know. And so yeah, but I think the giving away. There's so many, you go to so many places and you see anonymous donor kind of thing, or I don't know.
Yeah. So there is portions of that. So, a lot of my thoughts on this come from effective altruism, which I was reading a bit about, and once again,
You
you
you're
can.
very popular with FTX and
Oh yeah, and this is the hilarious thing. It's people take things too far. They always fucking take things too far, man, and
Mhm.
get wrapped up in other stuff that's not related to the
Or
what they start off with. Uh,
I think it's more like my problem with charity is that like the virtue signaling or the like look at what I can do type thing. Like I've had a long standing feud with Cardano stake pools that donate a percentage to some charity,
hmm,
because I think it's like it's kind of dumb in that they could just charge less fees and allow people to donate to whatever they want to,
hmm.
right? Like if I charge 2% and I donate, 1% of that or 1% of the fee to XYZ charity, like I think it's mostly a gimmick that people do because they get more out of the association with the charity. Like I'm the cerebral palsy charity stake pool, right? They literally get more out of it in most cases. There are a few that don't, because their association with that, which is not like granted or anything, but like, you
Yeah,
know,
that you can kind of just claim it. Yeah.
yeah, you claim an unclaimed charity and say this is mine, right? Like you kind of needed that in order to have some kind of like way to attract stake. But like you could just be the let have lower fees and let people donate to whatever charity they want to,
Mm.
rather than pre-allocating. You know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
one, and secondly, there's I would argue in most countries there are tax benefits for donating to charity. You're
Correct.
actually stealing money from the charity because presumably the people who like that XYZ charity would be able to give more to that charity if they were able to claim a tax deduction for it,
Yeah.
right? But by you donating it on behalf of them, you are kind of, if there's a 20% tax benefit, you're reducing their net gain by 20%. They're getting 80% of what they could be getting because of this weird thing. And again, it's mostly about you attracting stake to your pool through this thing, and it's just weird.
I love the example of charities because they get to the heart of one of the things I think most about life, which is just how paradoxical it is. And I want to talk about the perfect NFT
Mm.
after this because I think that
Paradox, good segue.
kind of gets into it. But so effective altruism to me as an idea, I think makes a lot of sense. You want to give if you're going to give away money and or try and make the world better, you want to do it in the most effective way. A lot of charities, most charities, in fact, 92% of the donations or revenue that comes in goes to the administrative
Administration,
costs
yeah.
and things like that. So yes, making it in the best way possible, and this is almost a step towards that kind of uncaring thing, because by that nature, things like establishing homes for people with cerebral palsy, or breast cancer research or things like that. A lot of this isn't that connection, i.e., I've got a family member who's got this and whatnot, and it ends up being you should be donating to people in Africa who that dollar that actually gets there, or the 90 cents or whatever it is, actually makes a much bigger impact.
I was gonna say there are a few stake pools. I'll qualify this. Like my comments are mostly about things that are donating to a charity, as opposed to charity pools which use the funds that they get to do direct good in the world. Right, like buy light bulbs. Like they take the light bulbs to Africa or something like that, and they distribute like that. I can kind of support because I feel like it's more of like a funding mechanism for doing good, as opposed to like just donating to the Red Cross or something like that, right? Is like a very kind of administrative, detached thing.
Yeah, don't donate to the Red Cross. They're awful. That's one of the 92% going to administrative ones. But there's so many like fun arguments you could get into. It's if me doing it this way, would those people have donated if I wasn't doing it kind of on their behalf, i.e., even though there are benefits that they could be receiving, would they actually do it? There's a good argument to say they wouldn't. There's also plenty of great arguments as to why effective altruism is well, obviously we saw with FTX, like it's not a waterproof uncorruptible kind of idea. People can still go, oh, this person says he's going to donate. Oh, wow, he's going to donate all of it when he's super rich. You're like, fuck off. Why don't you do some of it now? Why are you waiting for this future that might happen? And in this very obvious case, did not happen. This is talking about Sam Bankman-Fried for everyone who is not aware of that, and just type that into Google and you'll have some fun. And I do this, man. I've gone between. I've like donated for a while in this kind of effective altruism manner, and then I hear about some charity or something, just like with all these sub companies behind it, and doing all of this kind of nefarious / dodgy stuff, and I'm like, fuck this. I'm not going to donate anymore. I'll just pick up some litter around my local park and things like that.
Or just I don't know, directly do something with the money that you can see and verify that something good came of it.
Yeah,
right?
Like, There's so many
people out.
That you could have so many arguments on this, so many points of view to go down into. But yeah, that it's I do find it so paradoxical, especially this kind of charity thing, which I come back to. It seems to be like a yearly thing where I'll come back to it and be like, I should do more, and then I do more for a bit, and then I'm like, no, I'm not going to do this anymore. This doesn't make any sense.
I think it is kind of sad that like it's like unions and charities and like all these things that are supposed to be like helping people and good for people are like such kind of touch points for corruption and grift to happen, right? Like union bosses are very closely tied to the mafia and taking, what should be done for the members of the union to enrich themselves. And it just seems like, I mean, I was a pretty leftist person growing up, like most young people. I've slowly gone more and more like states' rights or individual rights, just because like observing the inability of large groups of humans to organize themselves in correct manners.
Yeah,
or like non-abusive manners.
My thoughts.
Right? Like, oh yeah, most people will fuck other people over when given the chance. So, like anytime, like when Scotland was trying to break away from the UK or Catalonia, right? I think I'm always in favor of the independence movement because, like, yes, a smaller unit of governance is going to be more effective. The best example I have of this is when I lived in India, in Mumbai. There's like a state in India called the UP, Uttar Pradesh, UTTARPRADESH. It's called it has like something like 200 million people in it.
Jeez.
it's like a state,
Yeah, right.
right? And it's like as many people as like the USA almost, right?
Yeah.
Like we're more than Japan, living in one state. And it's like, of course the place is a corrupt, kind of whatever thing. It's like, because it's so easy when you have, like 10% of the economy being the government, and there's 200 million people, even if they're not making a lot of money, it's just so easy for there to be grift, right? And you go around India. When I moved to India, I thought I had been to Thailand a few times as an undergraduate in Japan. Going to like Thailand for a spring break or something like that. You just buy a plane ticket and live on a beach for a week or two, and
Sounds
then go
good,
home.
man.
Kind of thing. But and I thought India would be like Thailand, but India was actually like quite, I think, a ways behind Thailand. Like the way that I tend to describe it is like when you walk around Thailand, like it's kind of dirtier than the West or Japan kind of thing. But every now and then you'll get a whiff of something because you're like downwind, and you turn up and you'll see like a pile of trash.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, like there's like a mountain of trash
A
at the
reminder,
corner, right?
yeah.
And you're like, what's going on there? But then when I moved to India, it was just like, it's not that there's a pile of it, there's just trash everywhere in all directions. And so I was like, oh, okay, like there's that's what they. You get what I'm saying? Kind of thing. Like there's like a level to this. And then what was interesting is I went to Sri Lanka, which is an independent island state country separate from India, right? But ethnically they're Desis, they're South Asian looking people, and my wife, she was my girlfriend at the time, but like we were at a crosswalk, and she was looking at the pole. She's like, she was trying to figure out like what is this? It was a crosswalk crossing button, and like she was like
really
20 something. She had never seen one in her life, and I just thought it was so interesting. I kind of teased her a bit, but I thought it was so cute. Like she'd never seen this kind of level of infrastructure of like a crosswalk button.
Yeah.
Because in Mumbai you play Frogger. You cross one lane at a time because there will never be like a contiguous straight shot across the street. So if there's like a 6 lane road, you cross one car at a time. You stand in the middle, you wait for cars to go, you cross another thing, and then like you just go one by one by one. And it was kind of, there's trash collection. There was like, this was in Colombo, the capital city of Sri Lanka. And what was nice about it was like, oh, here are the same people who have been able to organize themselves into like a functioning kind of society with, of course, India is also a functioning society, but just in terms of the infrastructure and development that way is like, and I attributed it to the size. Like, there's a lot less people in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is obviously not nearly anywhere near India's powerhouse economically, but it was just so much more manageable because like I'm sure if we Googled it, like a couple million people live in Sri Lanka. I'm gonna Sri Lanka population.
Australia is very similar with regards to the US. So we
22 million.
Yeah, we're around that size, 20, 26, 27 million, something like that. And we're so downstream from the US. Everything that happens there comes here in like 4 years later, something like that. Good and bad technology, and then the kind of cultural trends, which are wokeism, if you want to go
but you
to
can
that.
like what you can manage them cohesively.
I think it's
people or identity or a smaller number.
I think it's just the smallness. Like we just don't have enough people who go truly radical. I think that's what it gets crazy.
You need a large population to get these fringe elements on either side. Like the standard deviations don't.
Pretty much. I was saying to Juan the other day, like I seem to just meet these kind of radical people probably more than the average person. Probably just my lifestyle, I think, is definitely more like going out to outdoor settings, going into like weird groups.
You're bogged.
Yeah, no, I'm from Logan, so like technically yes, but I don't have the mentality of a bogan, unfortunately. You'll have to look elsewhere for that.
I don't know if we talked about it before. I watched like these opal hunter videos for about a week on YouTube.
Oh, nice. I used to live out. I used to live out where those sort of areas,
like prospecting, gold hunting in the Australian outback. It was like
I've done a bit of that. I've done a bit of that.
Yeah, it was a kind of amazing. I was like, does everyone find these like, $50,000 opals
Dude,
when they're digging around out there?
I've got a story for you. So
Yeah.
I worked in the mining industry, and this being
Mhm.
the actual physical material mining,
Mhm.
and we lived
Oh, yeah, as opposed to crypto
as
mining,
opposed to
like
crypto. I have to like make that
both.
clear now. And I lived out in a place called Emerald for a while, and
Mhm.
Emerald. All the towns are like Emerald, Ruby, Opal, Sapphire. Like we're
Mhm.
not that creative with
Mhm.
our names. And me and some other vacation students, we all went, and we were going like took the kind of company car, which was a Ford Falcon, I believe.
Mhm.
Not four-wheel drive, not meant to be taken off-road. We took it off-road and did some like opal and gem hunting. Of
Mhm.
course, we got it bogged, and so we went to this tiny little township, maybe 100 people in this kind of self-constructed. Half of them were caravans, so they could just be moved at any point. And we're just not knocking on this guy's door. We're like, hey man, we got stuck. Would you mind, giving us a hand? He's like, yeah, all right. I'm just finishing my tea. Come on in. And he invites us in, and all he had was a fly screen door that he opened. I don't think that it was even lockable. And we're just like chatting with him, and he's like, yeah, I have a mine just over here. Let's check out this out. And then right next to the door that he opened, the fly screen door, he had a jar just full of these uncut gems. And he starts showing us them, and he's like, yeah, check out this one. This is probably worth 40 grand, uncut. If I get it cut, it'll maybe be like 60 or 70. He just had it in the fucking jar right next to his fly
Right
screen
in
door,
front
man.
of
It was wild. Um,
you and the boys come back later that night,
yeah,
break
exactly, right.
it.
Yeah, it's when you're
Not your jar, not your uncut gems.
yeah, something like that. It was so this is where it truly shows that you're human, because flitting through my mind, from then on was like, I could steal this. He's not that strong. If I wanted to take this, I could take this. Thankfully,
Might makes right.
yeah, thankfully I don't have that in me, but I
Yeah.
do. I obviously do have it in me, because it went through my brain
Yeah.
multiple times. So
Yeah.
yeah, there's
I remember stealing as a kid, right? From my brother. He collected coins, I collected coins.
yeah.
And it was so stupid because like we had these little books, right?
Yeah,
And I took the thing out of his book and I put it in mine.
the most sophisticated theft of all time.
And my mom is like looking through it because we used to like go through our collections together. And she's like, "Oh, you're missing one because there's a fucking hole where there was something." And lo and behold, the same thing is in your book.
Oh man, kids are
Wow.
so funny.
I got a whooping, and I don't. It's interesting. Are people naturally good and corrupted by society, or people naturally bad and made
Ugh, I don't know. My story of stealing was, yeah, I had a friend who was a bit of a kleptomaniac, and we went to this like budget store that we just have here in Australia. I think it's called Choice, something like that. And we had our backpacks, and he's like, "All right, I'm gonna get this thing," and he gets like this tiny little toy, and I get a soft, squishy toy. It's probably worth 50 cents, something like that. Put it in my backpack. I leave, and I can see the difference between him and I. He's got this thrill of we just did it, man. Like we pulled off the heist, these things. I just felt like this gut wrenching guilt, this like, oh my God, like what have I done? On the walk home, we kind of split ways because he needed to go somewhere else or to his house.
Mhm.
And I started getting really paranoid. And there was this person maybe 500 meters behind me. I could
Mhm.
see them just on this really long street. And I just, of course, was like, oh my God, they're following me from the store. I got to get rid of it. I got to hide the evidence. So I like threw it into this random bush somewhere and just ran off. And oh man, I felt so, so bad. It was
I
awful.
don't know if I've ever stolen anything from a store. I think my brother was it, but yeah, it's weird. There were these people were talking about digital nomads in Lisbon and all this kind of stuff, and there's some negative reaction to the gentrifiers and everything. But it was really weird. I was having coffee with this guy from the Catalyst Swarm group who's moved to Lisbon, and he was talking about, he was staying in this like share house, guest house full of digital nomads, and they were talking about how to get quote free rides on Uber by
Yeah.
canceling their rides mid ride. And
What
they're
the
like,
fuck?
it's like you're basically stealing from like poor Bangladeshi guys in Lisbon as this digital, like if you're gonna steal, at least steal from someone who's like better off than you.
Yeah.
Like, don't, it's like punching down type thing in comedy or whatever, right? Like, don't steal from the fucking cab driver, you like schmuck, you know, like
Yeah, there's
I didn't
versions of
understand
this
it.
I
Yeah.
encountered whilst traveling. Similar sort of
Hmm.
things like trying to get free beers
Hmm.
or something like that from just
Yeah.
Colombian guys in their bar. Not even like a chain
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
bar or anything where you
Yeah.
can somewhat justify it, even though
Yeah.
that's still fucked up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. So
It was weird.
there's also like those people who just love the skintness in a way, and
What's skintness? I've never heard this
so
word. Like
being
getting away with it or
being skint is
cheap?
as being very cheap, and
Uh-huh.
so I would meet other travelers who their excuse for like, oh, I don't have enough money to buy a beer, and I'm like, why the fuck are you traveling? This is dude, you're not going to be able to enjoy it. But they got the thrill out of getting every last cent out of
Frequent flyer
packing
mile,
things,
whatever kind of
reusing
thing. Yeah.
clothes, taking asking for like the lost and found of hostels and just seeing what's in there. Yeah, oh geez, yeah, I could never live like that. I'm naturally very thrifty and not materialistic, but that was just a next level.
I've been in.
Ma-
I remember in high school, I for a week was reading about like living off of garbage, right, and like not buying anything, kind of thing. And
yeah.
oh, that's interesting.
Yeah,
Anyway,
yeah. I don't need to do that. I don't need
yeah.
to do that. Man, you've traveled everywhere. Where is there anywhere you haven't been? Because we were
I
talking
was gonna
last
say
time.
Africa, but technically, I lived in Mauritius for 4 months, which
Yeah,
is about halfway between Africa and Australia, or India, Australian or not Australia, India and Africa,
yeah,
and technically is part of Africa. I hadn't gone to Europe much until grad school, and I went to the UK and Amsterdam and Italy a little bit.
yeah,
I'm trying to think. I'd never been to Portugal before I moved here.
yeah. That's
Most,
a big move, man.
yeah, but I mean, like people ask me, like, you've never been to Portugal and you moved there, and I was like, yeah, but I lived in Mumbai for 3 years, so I'm
I can get
pretty
about
sure I can deal
anywhere.
with Portugal. Like I kind of my boss when I left the States, and I had resigned at my old company in Ann Arbor, Michigan. He was like, "This is a good move for your resume. Like once you've got Mumbai on your thing, like any company will know. Oh, he can live wherever we need him to live,
Right, right.
right?
Yeah,
Like he's a flexible person, and so I thought that was an interesting. Oh yeah, that's cool, and
yeah. Have you ever felt? I mean, so you were saying just with your heritage as well. You've kind
mhm,
of grown up in between worlds, right? So
mhm.
is that kind of part of the thing? You've never had a like a home base?
I always say like in the States, my for people to know, my mother is like white American, like Mormon. Like if you know crazy Mormons from Utah, like she's as white bread as they get. And my father's Japanese. He went to grad school in the States. He met my mom in Japan and they moved here, but or to there. And I mostly grew up in the States. I dropped out of high school a little bit, went to high school in Japan, and then went to undergrad in Japan finally. But I'd say that in Japan, when I'm in Japan, people can kind of tell that I'm part Japanese,
Hmm.
and they're like, "Oh, he's kind of one of us a little bit." In the States, they think I'm Mexican. I often get called like a spick or a,
Oh,
like whatever,
geez,
and
yeah.
I'm like, if you want to be racist to me, can you please call me a
Yeah,
Jap?
do it the right way,
Please use the
right?
right
Yeah, the right
epithet,
color.
not right. Like, not that I have anything against Mexicans or South Americans, but like technically you should whatever. So, but I always joked, and it's true. Like the best thing for me is living somewhere I don't belong, but it's okay that I don't belong because I don't belong. Like that evaluates to truth, right? Like when I'm in the States and like people are like, "You're not from here." When I was finishing up high school, someone's like, "How come you were an exchange student for so long?" I'm like, "You dumb motherfucker! I'm from here. You ignorant piece of shit! Like,
Yeah.
how stupid can you be?" You know, like, and it was just like, okay, I'm not like I just didn't believe it, and so I ended up renouncing my U.S. citizenship a couple of years back, and I'm very happy about that, and kind of moved on. I kind of want to give up the Japanese one too, and just like not be encumbered by any citizenship that I was born with. I
Yeah,
feel like
yeah,
that's
yeah.
like a transcendental kind of, like I don't respect your authority or
Yeah,
whatever, kind of
for
like.
sure. And then you
um,
start to realize like how hard it is to travel when you don't have a nationality, and it's like,
Yeah.
ooh.
Yeah. So I wouldn't quite become a stateless person. I would get a Portuguese passport first,
Gotcha.
give
Yeah,
up the
okay. Yeah.
Japanese, and then transition to part of the reason I moved to the EU is it's weird. Like I was considering Thailand or Vietnam or something, but I felt like as a kind of mobile person, I wouldn't quite call myself a nomad, but someone who moves around. I didn't want to like invest a bunch of time and money into like Thailand, and then if Thailand goes batshit crazy, I have to
Mm.
emigrate again. Whereas I felt like in Portugal and the EU, if I put my time in here and get a passport, I have now gained so much mobility in terms of I can move anywhere in the EU, and it's like first like post nation state type territory, right? Like I don't have to apply. I'm so jealous of like the Germans and French people I meet here who like all they have to do is go to the city hall and say I'm here, and like they can live in Portugal, right?
Yeah.
Whereas I have to go through this laborious year-long process to apply and get stamps and all this kind of visas and whatnot, and now I can stay here. But I
Yeah,
kind of that, and yeah.
for sure. I think there's also something to living in a place where, you know, if anything does, I think it was Spain, right? When it was the GFC, that their economy was especially hard hit and whatnot. But it's like you're in Spain, even if the money is fucked up and stuff, it's still a really nice, warm place. I kind of feel the same about
Yeah,
Australia. Like if Australia
yeah,
fucks up, I'd maybe just go a bit further north. So
yeah.
the winters, I mean, even here in,
More
in
temperate.
Brisbane, yeah, even here, like it'll get down to, like 7 degrees at night or something.
Mhm.
If I just went a little bit
You
further north.
poor cold,
Oh,
cold
dude, I
bee.
hate it.
Yeah.
Anything less than 20 is unacceptable, but
No, when I was in Ann Arbor, I learned when that's why part of the reason I moved to India. It was like minus 30 below
fuck
Fahrenheit, which is
that.
like polar vortex was blowing at us, and yeah, my car broke down, and I decided to get a bicycle, and I would take my daughter like 20 kilometers one way to school and back. I had this like frog suit. Got a thing to like but I started biking on like the coldest day of the year, and I thought that's actually good. Like every day was easier after
Yeah,
that
right,
first
right.
day because like it was peak cold, and it got like, oh, it's only minus 20 today, minus 10, 0, and it was like, oh, this is manageable. And then when it got bad was the next winter. After
Yeah.
going back from summer into winter, it's like, oh, fuck this shit, but um
I struggle with that as well. I say this with investing all the time. Like I find it really easy to dollar cost average when it's on its way down, but
yeah.
when it's starting to go up, it's like, oh, it's more expensive than it
Yeah,
was,
yeah,
a week
yeah.
ago. Or yeah, oh, that's funny. Yeah, I love traveling, man. I definitely need to get to Europe and keep saying. I'm hoping if I keep saying it enough, it'll actually happen
Are you
next year.
Scottish or Irish or something?
Nah, I'm just Aussie.
I
Well,
mean,
I'm
but a couple
half.
years back or something, generations ago.
I have
Some
no
of those
idea.
places are easier to get a
That
passport.
Yeah, there's a little bit of Swiss somewhere because I've got some
Mhm.
second cousins who are Swiss. I haven't looked far enough back,
Kyrin
but
sounds Celtic to me.
yeah, it's meant to be. But the reason for that is just my mum's name's Susan, and she's like, everyone her age is called Susan. So she's like, my kids are getting weird ass names. So hence Kyrin and my brother
Okay.
Prentice. So
Kyrin. Yeah, I was like, that's a
yeah.
bad spelling of Kyrin, but it's not Kyrin. It's
Yeah, exactly. It's like
Kyrin.
the Aussie bogan version. You know how there's like
Skylar, and we had
yeah,
some of those names in Utah. These weird
I,
ass.
I
Throw
love
a
it.
Y in there and make some shit up.
Or I think my mum's middle name is Michelle, but typically Michelle is spelt with two L's, is it? Or one? In any case, her middle name is spelt wrong.
My
and it's
brother
just
is Benji Man, because
Benji
my
man.
mother was tired after giving birth. So on his birth certificates, it's usually Benjamin, like
Yes.
J-A, right? But
Yeah.
he is Benji Man.
Benji man. Nice.
I thought that was so funny. I always give him a shit over it, because we neither of us realized it till we were old. Like, I think after high school, I'm like, wait, your name is not spelled correctly.
That's like Juan. So even how I'm saying it now, Juan, it's meant to be like Juan, like with a kind of hua sound.
Yeah.
And we always used to make fun in high school of his name and just like in a friendly way, Juan the Mexican, even though he's Colombian, it's like, shut up, Juan, you Mexican, like blah blah blah. And it'd be like Juan. I don't think even in our funny mispronunciations of it on purpose, we never once said his
You
name
got it right. Yeah.
correctly.
I worked in a call center when I was in Utah. The most valuable thing in Utah is that there's a bunch of high school students getting out of high school when it's dinner time on the East Coast of the USA. So all these call centers are set up there doing surveys or bugging people, right?
Gotcha.
Back when people used to do, this
Yep.
shit. And so I remember calling someone and going through my spiel with the computer thing. It was my first job in high school. I was like, hello, is Jesus there? And he's like, it's Jesus, man. Like,
Jesus.
but I was like hearing it kind of like, because you just see it on the prompter, right, or the screen.
Yeah.
And it's like, Jesus.
And you just expect, I mean, we hear so many stories of like, crazy Florida man and things like that. And it's just like, oh yeah, his name would be Jesus, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's funny. I hinted at it before, the perfect NFT, man. I love it. I love it so much. It's so funny. But where I want to start with it is not the kind of artistic side of the Ponzi reflection / highlighting / expose, whatever you want to call that, which is super intriguing. But I like technical decisions as well. There's one thing I really always struggle with art, which is how do you make the decision of this versus that, and having kind of a blank canvas. So for those who don't know, it's an NFT project you created with you said his name before, Wout. Yep.
Mick plus Wout, they're a duo, and I mostly interacted with Wout, but they do everything together. They're like they had a gallery in Barcelona or something like that, and they're traditional artists. Wout has more technical abilities or skill, does programming stuff, and so he did Dendrorhythms, which was another kind of generative art piece on Cardano. Before. Continue, sorry.
Yeah, so there's 512 of these, and a lot of it is playing on the binary theme. So it's 512 is 2 to the power of 9, and all of them have a binary signature on the bottom of it of ones and zeros. But you've changed it up in some cases where instead of it being 0 9 times, it'll be just the number 0 and then 1 0 and 0 1, which then means some things get cut and or replaced. So I was looking through some of them, and I'm like, a lot of them, and for those who there'll be some pictures on your screen, but it's sort of like a 3x3 grid, most of them of kind of fingerprints and various iterations of this playing on the binary theme. So the 3x3 grid, which is totally filled in, is all ones, and
5 1 1.
Yeah. But for some of them, there are blanks. So, for example, there's no NFT which has only the 3 fingerprints on the bottom and then blank spaces above that. Is that like how do you decide which one of those to cut or not to cut? That sort of decision for me is always like,
So
how do you do
yeah. So
it?
what the first thing I'll say is the whole project was kind of kicked off by, I don't know, do you know Cardano numbers? Do you
I'm
know
aware of
tiles
it.
with spaces, right?
Yeah.
Like it's 10,000 SVG like vector files that are stored on chain. The number is 1 to 10,000.
Hmm.
And I kind of thought when I saw that, it was one of the early Cardano collections, like, oh, that's the perfect NFT collection. Like, what more could you ask for a degen than like a ranked ordered list of the most rare thing to the least rare thing?
So good.
Like, that is like the epitome of what this whole space is about, right? And I got, I wouldn't, I said in a tweet, I got angry. I wasn't angry. I was like jealous
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
he had made this thing, which I thought was like laid bare the inanity or banality or something of the whole NFT space, right? And maybe I was projecting into that a little bit my stuff, right? Like my values or whatnot. But I thought that's an interesting prompt. The perfect NFT. Like, okay, given that this thing exists from 1 to 10,000, what so a lot of times I think people don't like my take on art, that like not everything is art and it's not all about navel gazing and like, oh, like anything can be art. Yeah. And I
Mm.
tend to focus on like this discourse conversation, like what it I think the easiest way to tell art is like tends to be things that last, that people value and like, put effort into preserving. And the other part is art. The easiest way I think of really telling art is like it influences other artists, and you don't
Yep.
know that until like n years in the future when something has influenced someone else. But I give this example because his work, whether it was serious or not, I don't know, I think it was kind of serious, like influenced me, and I'm very happy to point to it and say that thing over there kind of prompted this,
Yep.
right? And I don't think like all creation has to be like genius inspiration, like divine revelation with no kind of you get what I'm saying, right? Like it's very, I'm fine saying that was the starting point. And I tried to say like, how could you, what would like a peak NFT look like let's take everything about it and like just turn it to the spinal tap to 11. You get what
Yep.
I'm saying, right? Like,
Yeah.
but it goes to 11, and so like the mint, the drop, the scarcity, all this stuff. So we started with there's going to be some numbers, right? Not 1 to 10,000. We didn't know how many there would be. I'm trying to answer your question. How do you make decisions? And it's
Yeah.
like,
No. No.
well,
Keep going. It's better hearing it from your mouth than my dodgy interpretation.
so could there be like 512, 1028, 2048, or 1024, 2048, 4096, 8100? Like these are
Yeah.
powers of two. What is the right number of these things to have? And then so we had all these kind of like before there were fingerprints, it was just like dominoes, kind of like these white circles on a black background or black circles on a white background, right?
Hmm.
Of the patterns. And it was like well, when this whole idea of the mint, how the mint actually works, is about like price discovery happens by flippers, kind of people can buy and that you can't refuse to sell. What I
Hmm.
realized is, oh, we need there to be less, right? Because if every single piece gets bid on once and then stops, like if there was 8,000 of these things, right?
Mm.
And then everything received one bid purchase, that's not so interesting, right? Because the whole point of this mint, the way we designed it, was that it would like people would buy and sell from each other on the way up and stop. But if the interest was spread out, like the things that you could be interested in were spread too thin, then it wouldn't have this kind of concentrating effect. So what we realized was because we're doing this binary thing, it's on or off. Looking at them in grids, we like the idea of these kind of perfect squares,
Yep.
right? Of like a 1 by 1 grid, a 2 by 2 grid, a 3 by 3 grid. 4 by 4 grid would have been, to the power of 16 or
A lot
whatever,
of yes. Yeah.
a lot of numbers. And so the tic-tac-toe grid, the 9 square, seemed like a nice stopping point because it results in 512. To answer your question, why there's no bottom row, it's because that it exists, that number exists in the collection. It's just in the 2x2 grid space.
Yeah, correct.
And so part of this thing was like, so much about NFTs is about rarity and this kind of bullshit. Does it have a golden banana or a crown or whatever random trait? And so I liked the idea that the 0 and the 1 are on a 1x1 grid, right? And then there's from 2 to 15, they're on a 2x2 grid, because 15 can be represented with the 4 dots. And so the 3 bottom row, it exists, but it's 1, 2, 3, right? And it's in a smaller 2x2 grid. And I felt that kind of ratio of there's roughly 500 or 512 minus 16 pieces, which are on that 3x3 grid. There's these like roughly 16 on a 2x2 grid, and there's 2 pieces on a 1x1 grid. Like that was a nice kind of like a rarity curve for the degens to play with, right?
So like a question just with regards to that, and there's me just like absolutely my engineering analytical brain going nuts and wild over this. So it's represented in the 2x2, right? Why was it those 3 at the bottom and not perhaps like the 3 at the top that were chosen, I guess?
Well, no, I would say nothing is chosen. There's a rule set to everything, right? Okay. Like the way I tend to design is I set up rules, and the rules result in a certain outcome, right? Like I don't like the way that I do this generative stuff. And by the way, when I say I, in this case, it means Wout, Mick and Wout, and all of this. I just want to be clear, like this was a kind of collaborative effort, and that's even being generous. He did all of the actual work, right? Like we would have design crit sessions like once a month or something. We worked on this for about a year, where like he would show me what he had done. I would say, what about this? Right? It was like the best project to work on because I didn't have to work on it. But I did go to him with the original idea about how this thing could work, and we kind of it changed and grew over time in a really great way. I don't usually work with other people, so that was fun. So to answer this question, like we didn't choose individual things. We created rule sets, and those rule sets resulted in certain things happening, right? Because so like it's like if people talk about like creationism of like intelligent design, like God didn't create you, Kyrin. He created like a gravitational constant, which resulted in matter being concentrated around stars that would explode, and like millennia, millions of years, billions of years later, you popped out, right? Like, do you get what I'm saying? Like, to me, it's more fun designing in this kind of creationist kind of urge to. You set the starting conditions, and then this explosion happens. And the chips fall where they may. And there's not a lot that's random in the collection. I have to qualify that because the fingerprints that people make are kind of randomly generated based on their fingerprint using some kind of pseudo-random process, right?
But, so in this case, the rule set would be sort of the 2x2 square would be maybe starting from the bottom left-hand side or something. So if it's
they always start from the bottom left, right? Like we're just mapping the numbers from the bottom left.
Gotcha.
Okay. Because I mean, to answer, if you imagine like, how do you say, piece of graph paper with an X and a Y axis. We were just imagining it's like the upper right quadrant. Is that like quadrant 1? You know what I'm talking about, right? Like X positive, Y positive. And so we put the first cell in. I'm reversed in here, so if I'm trying to do this the right way,
like 1 by 1 or something.
This is the first one. This is a weird visual. This is the first one. This is the next one. Over. It's like a tic-tac-toe grid where the bottom left grid is the first position. To the right of that is the second, third, and then you go up a row and back to the left. So it's like reading a book, but from the bottom to the top is the order that we decided to lay it out in, because it seemed like up and to the right was positive, or a larger thing that seemed like an intuitive sense that how would you read these things, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And,
so for those who are wondering, this is still likely going on as this is getting released, and
Yep.
it's 2 weeks time from when I'm actually releasing it. But the whole the kind of degen aspect that you were talking about is you can buy it off other people without their consent in a way. So it's kind of an auction style NFT mint, I guess, if you want.
Yeah,
want to
it's
put
a
it like
hybrid. Like Wout has jokingly referred to it as a Watanabe auction, which is my
Nice.
surname. I kind of like that. Is one my main contribution to the project was, what if you did a mint this
cool
way?
name.
Yeah, and so the main idea is, for those who aren't familiar with it, is that if you're an artist and you release a NFT collection, right? Like, you have this problem of like money on the table, right? Like, most people don't want to, quote, leave money on the table. If you're selling your house, if you're doing any negotiation, you want to like get the maximum for your house, right? And so I approach this problem by saying, how as an artist, well, let's take a step back. If you price your project too low, you left money on the table. You could have, you put work into this thing. You should be paid for it. And so you lose out on the money you could have made. If you price it too high, conversely, your project likely won't sell out, right? And that kind of sucks, because you put a lot of work and effort into it. And especially in the NFT space, if you can't even mint out, like, your work is just dead, right? Like, nobody will care about you. You will be utterly forgotten and left behind. And so, like, you can't do that, right?
Does that have parallels in the traditional art scene? So I don't know that much about art and art scenes and stuff. If you have a gallery opening or something like that, is it expected you sell out or things
I don't
like that?
know.
Or is
I
it
don't
even worth
interact
drawing that
much with
parallel?
contemporary art world. Like, my art experience is mostly going through museums. This is like a very funny thing I talk about. Like, I kind of don't care much for contemporary art. And it's so funny being in the NFT space a bit tangentially, is I never imagined owning art when I was an undergrad. Like, you go through, like, I can't afford to buy these, great masters or anything, but it didn't matter. Like, I enjoyed seeing and thinking about and experiencing art, and ownership was never on my radar of, like, even like a remote possibility, right? And it didn't really matter to me. I still spent my weekends going to see different, openings, galleries when there was something in town, kind of thing. But um I can imagine, probably, like, in contemporary art scene, I don't know that it's as brutal as the NFT scene is, right? Because I think
Because it's very public on the public ledger. There's no denying it.
And I think it's more for, like, if something didn't sell out, obviously you get some buzz and some hype and some interest, probably, like, if you had a good gallery opening and people responded well to the work, right? But I think that there is a lot of times, like, the idea that, oh, this was too early, and something gets appreciated later in the art world than when it came out, and there's like a retrospective or something, and people look back, oh wow, what that guy was doing was really prescient and worth considering again. Whereas, like, I tend to say that if you're an artist working in the NFT space, you kind of have to have an obligation to figure out how to get eyes on the thing, because if you don't sell out or you don't get people interested in the thing, your work is kind of written off as not relevant. You get what I'm saying, right? Like,
I was having a chat with my friend Justin on the last conversation, and he's a graphic designer. He's created some really cool brands like Zen Garage here in Australia, and he's very similar in this respect of he was saying, and I'd like to get your opinion on this. An artist, I guess, has to have something that's almost public facing. So if you're just doing stuff in your bedroom and you're creating things, that's awesome. Kudos to you. But there is something in the actual process of releasing it out to the public for criticism, for praise, for whatever
Mhm.
it is, that kind of defines what art is. And this is just my interpretation of what he was saying, because
I think it is about discourse mostly. Like I've used this word a few times. Like
yeah.
architecture is a pretty unique discipline. At least we call it a unique discipline relative to engineering,
Mm.
because they tell us in school like engineers don't really learn about the history of engineering,
Nah, nah.
like Gustav Eiffel, or like how did this process, how did we get to where we are today? And architects are very bound up in history about like
Gotcha.
Egypt to Greece to Rome to Baroque to like early modernism to postmodern, then deconstructivist, and like we go through, and like all of these are things that you study and learn about, like how did we end up here where we are, where are we situated, and
Yeah.
we talk about the disciplinary conversation, like what are the topics which are germane to architecture and creative production in society today, right? And we think it's like you can't really talk about that stuff without understanding where you came from, right? And it is kind of unique relative to like civil engineering, right? Yeah, there's probably a little bit of that, and so on. Like, oh, we had early iron truss structures, and then it went to,
Yeah.
space frames, and then
In
it's whatever.
there's a slight bit in mining engineering,
Hmm.
i.e., this is what mines used to look like.
Yeah, and it's probably
It's
through the lens of safety regulations mostly, right? Like how things
correct.
have
Yeah.
developed, and why we
Yeah.
don't do things the way we used to do, because, right, because there's human factors involved or whatever.
A little bit is just related to kind of geology. I This
Hmm.
is why artisanal mining was so big, was because it was
Hmm.
fucking right near the surface. It was literally in the rivers.
Yeah.
This is why these machines started working. This is why how the drag line, for example, was
Hmm.
was kind of created, and it needs to work in only these certain conditions. But it's
Interesting.
not particularly subjective. It's very
When to
much
apply these skills in
yes,
certain
correct.
conditions and
Yeah,
whatnot.
yeah, and I can't think of any mining heroes.
Yeah.
There's not a single person that I can think of who was like, oh, this was the guy who discovered gold out here, or this was the guy who created this process. Nah,
It's
it's
interesting
not.
because like a lot of the most famous buildings that you learn about in architecture are these like unbuilt buildings, like these concepts that were drawn and designed but never built and never had any
Okay.
intention of being built, frankly, right? And so uh like there was these like Russian constructivist things. It's like great spiral monument. It's kind of like the Russian version of the Eiffel Tower.
Hmm.
There's this big dome thing, and there's all these other things that like were kind of like provocative statements to the architecture discipline as a whole that people learn about and whatnot. And they never got turned into buildings. But I don't know if we talked about this last time. Like architecture, on my first day, the professor was like, "You're probably here because your mom wants you to build her a house. But let me tell you, you will never build anyone a house because you are studying to become an architect. And architects don't build houses. We design and conceptualize built environment, and other people build things. Like
Yep.
if you happen to build a house, great, but that's not the role of an architect in society." And so to get back to your point about artists and sharing, and like it is a little bit like if a tree falls in the forest and no one is around to hear it, doesn't make a noise. Like
Mm.
I do think like if you were to make a great work of art somehow and then to set the canvas on fire or to delete the hard drive, in a way it's a thing, but it's also not a thing in that um I think there's this do you know Kurt Vonnegut? He's an
Yeah.
American
Yeah.
author, right?
Cat's
Slaughterhouse Five.
Cradle, Slaughterhouse
Yeah,
Five. Yeah.
exactly. He in one of his like later autobiographies was like, I write because when I was a kid, like I didn't connect with other people, and when I read, I felt I had a connection to people who were long dead, and I like it gave me comfort. So the
Mm.
reason I'm writing is to connect with a future person, to be what I had when I was a boy, to connect across time and space. And I kind of think artistic production is a kind of a lonely craft, or endeavor, right? Like most people who are like making stuff tend to be a bit introspective and a little bit damaged or quirky.
Yeah.
And I do think it is this kind of like I think it's Rilke. There's some German poet. It's like the world doesn't need another love poem, right?
Yeah.
Like having he was a poet. He wrote love poems, to be clear. But the idea was like there is enough literary canon that like we don't need any more of it, right? Like you have an entire life in front of you. You'll never get through everything, right? So what's the point of writing? But I think what an interesting thing is as it relates to blockchains and other stuff, like entropy happens and culture is forgotten, right? And even great books eventually are forgotten. And so you kind of need to replenish the cup of culture.
Yeah.
Probably most of us will never make a great work of art, but there needs to be some kind of interstitial filler between the great works of art to allow people to make another great thing, because eventually something gets bumped off the list, like Gilgamesh, right? It will be forgotten or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And
Yep.
so
So many books that I've read of classics have kind of been like this. The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith.
mhm.
Adam Smith. Forgot
Yep.
his name. And if you read the version that kind of he wrote in English, it is almost incomprehensible. That is
Mhm.
barely modern day English, and
Yeah,
it
yeah.
is just a slog and a grind, and you won't really come out with anything from it, which is a shame because so many of the principles are in there are like
Mhm.
the economic principles.
Mhm.
This is he talks about the pencil and how the pencil is actually the work of 15 hundreds of different people, each specialized in how they can create the rubber tip, the metal
Mhm.
casing, the wood, the lead inside, and all this sort of stuff. But it does need a modern book to kind of convey many of those same principles. Same, I notice this with self-help books all the time.
Mhm.
You don't really need to read anything other than Think and Grow Rich. That is
Mhm.
probably like the epitome of the self-help book, but you will still see that there are Atomic Habits or all these other sort of ones which are, they have a little different spin on it, but they all
Mhm.
pretty much say the same thing.
My mom was big into self-help books, but yeah. Yeah, I think there's something to there's a limited number of motifs and ideas. Like I tend to think about like Greek tragedy and comedy. Like,
Hmm.
is it a tragedy or is it a comedy? What is this kind of narrative about? And yeah, there's very few number of stories to tell. Having said that, um, like you do kind of need to retell the same stories for the modern time to make them more digestible or comprehensible by people, right? I'll say like who is it? I think it's Goethe, the Sorrows of Young Werther.
Yeah.
Like when I read that, I had that kind of bonding. I was going through like a unrequited love, of a young college boy. I thought this
and
girl
he
was like,
and he reads the suicide book.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Of like, I love this girl. I forget her name, but she's like this angel and so
Yeah.
beyond me, and blah blah blah. And I was like, oh, he gets me, like, and but yeah, it's a little bit opaque, right? And I was of course reading it in translation because I'm not German.
Yeah, same.
But
Yeah.
uh, it's fun to. I don't know. I think that's what Unsigs was kind of about for me. I think there's a finite number of things you can talk about in art, and I think when you have a new medium like blockchains or photography, like
Mm.
you have a chance to mistranslate and create something a little bit new from the existing artistic works. Because like if you imagine like if there's a subject being perceived, right? An object being perceived by a subject. Like from the lens of literature, we're looking at this love from here, right? From the lens of photography, we're here. From the lens of poetry, we're looking here. We kind of triangulated this thing, right? All these different mediums have different unique characteristics, which throw light on and draw the object being characterized or written about. But when you introduce a new medium, you're getting like, yes, you're still talking about love or whatever these finite number of tropes are that humans like to think about. But by virtue of it being from this other point, it gives you a different perspective, quite literally, on the thing that you're talking about, and you kind of learn a little bit different nuance to the thing. I give this example usually as like, if you I know a decent amount of Japanese. There are words in Japanese that don't exist, or in any language that don't exist in another language,
Hmm.
and you can't really translate them. Even you can translate them into phrases sometimes, right? But there's no word.
Yeah.
And that, what I like to think of is like different artistic mediums are these different perspectives or lenses. And I actually think like it's it's quite an exciting thing, because I was in that Rilke thing, like what's the point of making art when all the great stuff has already been done, right? And like we don't really need any more of this stuff. And so when I started to give my hand at trying to figure out blockchain based stuff, I think there's something different about it that makes it worth exploring and kind of interrogating a bit, because it can tell us a little bit about human experience and things in a way that photography or literature or I don't know, journalism or other things can't,
Yeah, I
by
actually
virtue
just
of it being new.
put something together in my own head, which I'd never thought of before. Very similar to you. Before the blockchains came around, I was never that interested in art. You know, I would go similar like you, maybe to some museums and things like that, but I wasn't something I'd ever own myself.
Mm-hmm.
I never would have even thought of doing that. And another aspect of me, which I think now plays into this, which I just realized is I've never given a scratch that. I've given a girlfriend flowers once, and I hated it. I fucking
You
hated it
sissy, you
Be-
sissy.
because I think my reasoning is I'm giving you something and it's gonna die, and it's almost like It's my expression of love is like I
Fleeting.
love you, and now it's going
It's
to
over.
end in ruin. Sort of like this is what's going on in my head, kind of. And so now putting
Somebody
those two
blew my
together,
mind.
I now go like, oh yeah, you can have and the short digital art's been around for ages. Well, not ages, a couple of
You
decades.
should. You next
Um,
time you're gonna give your girlfriend an unsig, is what you're saying,
yeah,
right?
pretty much.
Because yeah.
Honestly, that is more up my or like a picture of digital flowers. Yeah. I'm so romantic.
Somebody, I think death is a pretty interesting thing. But my Gucci co-founder, he's been living with me for a week or two now, because he's just moved to Lisbon and he's looking for a place.
Mm,
But he blew my mind when he told me parents buy dogs for their kids so that they can experience death.
yeah.
And that blew my mind, because I was like, when well, we've had a few dogs, and I don't get dog. I've never got a dog. I got a dog once for my wife, but it was a different thing. We can come back to that later. But like, I don't like having dogs because they die and it's painful, and so I've decided don't get dogs.
Yep.
Right. But apparently, the lesson I was supposed to learn is this is how,
This
death
is
is a
what
part of
happens. Yeah.
life, and this is, you explain that thing, and they you die in 7 to 10 years, and you're supposed to internalize that and deal with that kind of pain and suffering through the proxy of a loved pet, as opposed to grandma or whatever, right?
An interesting
I
aspect.
think. And I'm like,
I've
wow, didn't realize that.
yeah, it's like morbid,
I
very
just I
morbid.
just I just threw it away, and not the dog, but like this idea, and not deal with the pain and suffering. But I think it is it
There
was
might
an
be something
interesting.
in that. I've never had. So my family, my mum's side of the family is in New Zealand. My dad's side
Mhm.
is in Newcastle, and kind of both of them they're not estranged by any means
Mhm.
in any significant manner. But
Just grew apart a little bit.
yeah, we're here in Brisbane.
Mhm.
It's multiple hours either
Mhm.
way to go see them. So I've, how much time have I spent with my cousins, aunts, and
Mhm.
uncles in face to face? geez, it's probably like less than 48 hours in terms of like, because even when you're at their place, that sort of thing, how often are you actually conversing with your aunt or your uncle? It's, maybe like an hour stretch. And thankfully my mum, dad, and brother and all my best friends are still alive. So I never have had to, although I have had grandparents pass and whatnot, I've never had that.
Death
That
as a close by person. I'm 38.
yes,
Never happened yet. Only my older relatives, who it was kind of their time, and it wasn't really sad. It was, kind of like, they're released from their pain and suffering, so we can be happy for them, kind of thing.
Yeah. And look, there might be something to that. You might be more emotionally prepared than I am, having gone through dogs than
I don't
me.
think so. I don't think it's similar at all. But at least conceptually, as a parent, you're able to walk your kid through, I won't always be here, or like this is not I wouldn't jump to there necessarily, but at least like this is part of life, and I've tried to teach kids don't run in front of cars, because
they just keep on fucking doing it. Those stupid kids,
right? Like I have this one, my fucking son, man. He just he sees a car, he loves to like jump in front of it. You are not long for this world, buddy. Like,
oh no.
So yeah, Perfect NFT is kind of, sorry for the weird segue, but it's like
no, it's good. Is it on chain itself?
Yeah. So it's using this wow.
I thought it was, but I get these things wrong. So
So this metadata standard that he came up with called the Venster metadata standard, and I think it is in a way kind of inspired by Unsigs. Like there's this renderer NFT that has all the code in it for how the rest of the collection is processed, and then every other NFT has a set of arguments in it that kind of, what number am I? Right, essentially, and then that number is passed to the reference NFT, and then when you run that code with these parameters, it results in this output, right? And
I did it wrong. I got the high numbers.
Yeah. Well, some of the high numbers are interesting, like 511 or whatever, right? And part of the whole idea is that if Unsigs was about like NFTs and blockchain as a medium, right? And it starts to deal with a little bit of the ledger by having these references to like the 000 NFT and the individual one. What this to me is like, this is a full-throated embracement of like ledger as medium, because like the mint is part of the artistic piece, quite literally, in the NFT.
Yeah.
Like if you the canvas is literally blank at the start, right? Like there's all these. Anytime there's a 1 in the binary encoding of the number, that's a spot that you can touch and put your fingerprint on the piece, right? And so everyone, when they choose to buy this NFT, is placing a fingerprint on the piece. Right. And if they don't choose to buy it, they're the absence of their fingerprint, right? Or someone else's fingerprint. And so when the piece that you end up with is touched by everyone who came before you, right? And like some people are choosing what NFT they want because they like the fingerprints on it of the other people, right? Because all of them are different, and every participant, every wallet has a different fingerprint than everyone else, right? Like, do you get what I'm saying? Like it's the
I want to describe this to people as well. So they started off, as you mentioned, completely blank. And what was the starting price? Was it 8 ADA?
8 ADA.
8 ADA, yeah. So there would be essentially like you buy one of these 512 or however many of them you want to buy. And then once they either all get bought up or it reaches a certain time limit, then the next round starts and you can buy them again from that person for 16. And so that person actually gets some money. So it's
the round is the price increase is determined by what percentage of the collection in the round sold. So at the start, there's 512. All 512 were chosen one by one, right? Everyone chose which one that I want, and they touched it, right? Then that was supposed to go for 10 days. It went for about an hour or two before it sold out.
Yeah,
right? And
you can
so
tell I'm not degen enough because I think that was 3 a.m. here, and I was like, "Fuck that! I'm not getting up for that." So I
yeah,
woke up after I think 5 rounds had already been
yeah,
done, or 4 or 5 rounds, and was like,
yeah,
"All right, it's still at a I can still join and partake in this. It's just
yeah.
not as crazy as those first rounds were."
Well, yeah. So the first one went quite fast, and so it went from 8 to 16, 16 to again powers of 2,
Yes, correct.
because every round completely sold out. So it was 100% sold out, 100% sold out, 100% sold out. In the last round, it was 50% sold out. So we went
Yeah,
from
like
512 to
exactly
768.
50%.
Yeah, it was
Oh,
fun. I loved it.
beautiful.
So from 512 ADA to 768 ADA in price. If this round were to completely sell out, it would again go up 100%
Correct. Yeah.
to 768 times 2. But kind of the whole point is, if this was like a normal PFP collection, I really like this mint because like the floors will all die out at around the same price, right? And like, I don't know, it's really interesting to me. Like, I thought, looking from the outside at PFPs, that people wanted to get rare ones, right?
Hmm.
Like, you want the top tier
Yeah,
ultra
the
rare anything.
gold,
Yeah.
the legendary. Yeah.
But what I've seen it pop up a few times on Twitter is like, if you get a not floor one, you should sell it almost immediately at launch and trade it for a bunch of floors, because
Hmm.
like there's not many people who are willing to drop 50K or 100K ADA on a rare NFT, right?
Yeah.
Like, the number of people in the world who have that level of conspicuous consumption is quite limited, and they may or may not be interested in this NFT collection, right? But so if you do get a rare one, the play is almost always apparent, trade it for 10 to 50 or whatever common ones from the collection to maintain your exposure to the collection, but to have a much more liquid asset that you can sell off one at a time as
Gotcha.
the
Yeah.
floor price goes up, right? I didn't know this.
Yeah, I suppose that's
But
like the mentality of a professional. I
yeah,
love that
exactly.
professional NFT trader.
Right? Like, exactly. It's kind of bizarre,
Quality.
but so kind of the point here is that like, um the common ones, right? Like the something that from the collection which doesn't have anything maybe stand out about it, doesn't draw your attention either in the pattern or the number or whatever. These should all kind of die out at the same level. Then the next tier of things would go to another price level, right? Then they'd stop being bid on at that price level, and then like the peak one, like maybe the 0 or the 1 or the 511, like these might go on for a longer time, right? Or
Yeah.
the powers of 2, right? That have only
Or,
one dot on them,
or
right?
if all is right and well with the universe, 69 and 420 will be the ones that go on the
Yes,
longest.
yes, yes. Yeah. So that kind of thing, right? Is what people are, I guess, thinking about how this could work. And again, for me, the piece is like almost like a piece of music that's being performed. How people respond to it, how they choose to bid on it, who bids, why they're bidding, like that, it's a very performative art piece, like on the blockchain, like interpretive dance or modern dance, right? Like, if it's all degens bidding, then like the floor will collapse because people were just playing musical chairs in
Yeah.
this kind of thing, and they don't actually want what they want. What I'm really happily surprised about is the number of people who seem to actually want the NFTs they're bidding on. Like, they
Yeah.
get it,
Correct. Yeah.
right? And they're like, I want this. And it's kind of weird because part of the reason it's called the perfect NFT is like, to me, looking from the outside in at NFT space, is like the perfect NFT is something you flip, right? Like, and you make money on. Like, that's what people are hoping to get from their
Mm.
monkey picture, right? And so we made this collection kind of that involves this natural mechanism that you don't even have to do anything and it sells itself, right? Like, if you
Yeah.
bought for 256 and someone came in and took, like, that's a 2x, right? Like, congratulations, wham bam, thank you ma'am, kind of thing. And like, very quick and anonymous. But in doing so, we made this thing that people seem to have similar to unsigs, like this quasi emotional attachment to. This because they're putting their fingerprint, not their literal fingerprint, but a fingerprint on it that's tied to them.
Yeah.
Some people are doing these. I won't talk about it, but they're doing a little bit interesting things with the pieces, right? To like trying to have all their friends touch the same one, and then one of them gets it at the end, and
Yeah.
and then they've all kind of contributed to this piece.
And it's almost like, the memes that come out of it, the pending meme. Holy fuck, that's funny. The
Yeah.
and so for those who don't know, that was essentially, there was a time limit where if you clicked on buy, it would give you 15 minutes to actually send in the ADA. And people were doing this with only 1 or 2 or 5 left in the
At the
kind of
end of a
collection.
round, it would be, like there's only 2 left.
And so all the degens are there waiting for the next round to start to be able to buy, the fancy ones again, the rares, and yet there would be people would buy and then just like let this time limit go.
There was one guy who didn't like me on Twitter, and he's blocked me, or I blocked him, or I don't know what, but he was participating in the mint, and he was kind of goading everyone, like, I have it, and he sent a screenshot of like the reservation window. He's like, I'm gonna go eat a pizza. Oh, this is a good pizza, right? And he just like, and he got it twice. Like he got it, and because he knew when it was about to expire, I guess he had another window open, like ready to click the moment it expired, and so he beat everyone else again. And so like he had it for 30 minutes, and he just had like, I don't know, tens or hundreds of people waiting in the Discord, like And so we created the pender role, and he's the pender that in the Discord,
and that's brilliant, man. You've got even haters participating. That's the sign of a successful. Not even like I find the financial stuff the least interesting thing. It's the human behavior. It's the reactions. It's the excitement, the potential disappointment of the not being the end of the greater fool theory if you're not actually interested in the actual art of it.
I always say, few people said like it's the perfect Ponzi, and I'm like, it's a Ponzi. There's a big difference actually between a Ponzi and this, if you just think about it, right? In a Ponzi, like the late entrants are paying the rewards of the early entrants, and they're left holding the bag, right? Like they don't get any because no one comes after them, so they don't earn anything. But there's also this idea in a normal auction, like if you and I were just bidding, if we were in a room and everyone's bidding on a piece of art, right? Almost by definition, the person who wins an auction is an idiot, because they have paid an amount of money that no one else in the world is willing to pay for the piece that they won. You get what I'm saying, right? Like if you buy a piece of art or anything at an auction, you have done price discovery to the point that, no one is willing to pay $1 more than what you paid for this thing.
Yeah.
That's kind of the definition of overpaying, isn't it? Like no one, and so in some auctions, the winner pays the second highest bid. I think that's a more rational, because someone else thought that this was a valid price to pay for the thing, right?
For sure. That's an interesting aspect. Yeah, I don't know. When I think of value, I definitely, because I think about this a lot with the podcast, because I don't earn advertising revenue or sponsorships or anything like that. I don't believe in that. I think that model's kind of broken and leads to bad incentives. And so I always encourage the people listening, like, follow the value for value model. I create something and then you just send it back. And it can be sent in the way that I do it is through kind of like Bitcoin and a monetary form. And there's some cool mechanisms to do that. But then also a lot of the value is just like, if you want to share it with a friend, if you notice I mistake something, I've got a spreadsheet that one of the listeners helped contribute and make, because I was having trouble with like chapter markers and Excel and all this bullshit. And he created this thing for me, and it's like, I use it all the time. So yeah, when it gets to that aspect, I suppose it's just weird because a lot of the art scene, and especially when it gets to those really high levels, there's ulterior motives behind it, i.e., it's money laundering or it's a tax
Tax
write-off
shelter,
or
yeah.
it's but I wouldn't necessarily say that the person buying it at the end is an idiot, but
But
yeah.
you get what I'm saying. Like, in art, it's a little bit different, I think. But if we were talking about like if you have an auction for a house, you know, like some kind of repossessed item or something, right? Like other commercial goods.
Mm,
Auctions, almost by nature, mean that you have found a price at which no one else is willing to pay,
correct, yeah, yeah.
which is kind of a bad thing, a bad price to pay. You get what I'm saying? That's what I mean by idiot,
Yeah,
right? Like,
yeah,
generally
okay, yeah.
speaking, when you buy a pizza or other goods, you should pay what other people are willing to pay for the item, because why would you pay more than that?
Mm,
But when you, especially in the art market, it's usually two guys, you know, bidding against each other from the Middle East for this, you know,
yeah,
work of
Monet or
classical
whatever, yeah.
Renaissance kind of thing, whatever. And so, um, why is that relevant here?
So you
Um,
were describing the difference between the Ponzi and the
ah,
perfect
and
NFT.
in the perfect NFT, you know, the last person in is the winner of the auction. If if they were actually bidding on something that they wanted to receive, that has no relationship at all with a Ponzi, right? Like, they are the winner of the auction. They got the NFT that they were trying to bid on, and in that case,
Yeah,
I'm very happy for them. If they were a degenerate who was just trying to flip and hope somebody else would come in after them, frankly, fuck them, and I don't care if they're down bad, right? Because I'm not making this for them. I'm making, you know, and I'm quite happy that they would go try to sell it on JPEG Store for half of what they paid or whatever, and someone who actually wanted that piece would be able to buy it, right? So I love it. Like, I love the idea that people who want the thing get it, and people who were speculating on it get burned. To
mm,
me, that's like a fabulous thing, right? Like, I want them to get burned, because
yeah,
like
yeah.
it's not for them, right? And if you're the kind of person who's like just trying to like flip and make money on the NFT scene or whatever, right? And like just being mercenary about it, I think it's actually a valuable lesson to learn. It's like, this is like this merry-go-round kind of situation is like not sustainable. It's stupid, and very likely to up in financial ruin, right? So,
Yeah,
um,
I'm very curious as to how the end of this will play out, because there's so many different ways it could go. It could,
yeah. But that's
it
where it's
could.
like, it's an orchestra, and you guys are the people. You know, we've put the instruments on the stage; they're there, and there's kind of a tug of war happening between degens and people who appreciate and understand the piece. And I think it will be quite interesting how it plays out. It's already playing out, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
exactly. It could go slow and then it could go fast
mhm,
again.
mhm.
If it gets down to low numbers, and then
Yeah,
it's just like
and it just goes. Yeah,
then
there's
it
a
could
few
go
of
slow
these.
again if
You
there's
know,
just people who are like, I'm gonna wait and see on this one, sort of.
yeah,
Yeah,
the tempo, the pacing, also what is valued, right? What do people want? What gets selected? What doesn't get selected, right?
yeah.
Um, it's always interesting to me. The is it clays, or almost all PFPs? I shouldn't sing all clays. Like, they tend to have like the darker skinned people at the floor of the collection.
Oh, really?
They don't get bought, or
Lordy.
females, right? Like, because most of these people are, they look a little more like you than me, Kyron.
Yeah, yeah.
It's just like, oh wow, like that's, I wouldn't say it's an indictment on the space, but it is like an interesting reflection of, um again, I don't think it's racist. It's just like, oh yeah,
That'd be a
people
good
want to
study.
buy things that look like them,
Yes, correct. Yeah.
because for these identity things, and these things
Pe-
don't look like most people, so there's less demand for them, so they sit at the
yeah,
floor.
and who has disposable income? Yeah, usually
Yeah,
it's people from
and who's into
like Western
crypto,
countries and
right?
whatnot.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and so
yeah,
it's just like,
exactly.
and but if you and then, I mean, it's kind of a weird situation for a creator. Like, if you don't include women or minorities in your collection, of course you'll get yelled at for not having inclusive, you know, PFP
Yeah,
collection. And if you
yeah.
do, then it's like, how come no one in your community wants to buy these things? How come they always sell for less than the other ones, right? Like it's a very, I think that would be a fun project to do. Is that's where I think the perfect NFT kind of plays, right? Like observing NFT culture and critiquing and commenting on it. Like that's what a lot of people didn't really get when the project was announced, this perfect NFT. They thought like, they're like, oh, let's see the perfect NFT. Huh? He's so cocky. He
Yeah,
thinks
yeah.
that he's making the perfect NFT.
Yeah,
Like, oh,
it's going to be
fuck
like a
you.
PFP. It's going to be
Yeah,
generative. It's going to be
yeah,
colorful. It's going to have all this utility.
yeah. But it's like, I always kind of say that was a weird sound I just made. The sound like a didgeridoo or whatever. But, the one way that I read the perfect NFT is peak NFT, right? The epitome of PFP NFT culture. Of course, it's not a PFP, but it is. I mean, the choice of turning these what was originally white and black dots into fingerprints was a kind of like nod to the identity aspect of the PFP NFT space,
Hmm.
right? Like what's more like identifying than your fingerprint, right? Like that it's used in crime. It's used as like a way to tie an individual back. I guess we could have done strands of DNA floating in the spaces or whatever, but I felt like it was a way of, pulling in some of these motifs and things from the NFT scene and representing it, um and getting that kind of double entendre of like leaving your mark, or I like this idea of like people feeling like they touched and helped make the thing, right? Versus that's probably why it was fingerprints and not DNA, right? Like
Hmm.
there's this kind of people can visualize, I think, this idea that they participated in and touched the NFT by signing this wallet transaction in a way
Yeah.
that probably it wouldn't be like leave some of your DNA behind, right? Like wouldn't have been
Upload your
as
DNA to the
yeah
blockchain
yeah
and
as evocative or as kind of I don't
well,
think it would have worked as well linguistically.
yeah, it actually got me looking at my fingerprints because I hadn't done that for a long, long time. Probably since I was in some sort of school class and we,
Hmm.
put our fingerprints down. And I was realizing like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, I've actually like one of my fingerprints is it the whirl? I can't remember.
Yeah,
My
the whirl, the spiral, the tented arch. I have
yeah,
a lot of double spirals, which don't appear in the collection, unfortunately. But there's like two whirls that run past each other, and apparently they're quite rare. So I'm quite proud of myself.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I've got one whirl on my left hand, and then the rest are like arches. But yeah, it kind of gets related to that immutability that's why the NFTs actually, even though I agree for the most part, like they're fucking JPEGs, man. Like, what are you doing? There is something about this, something. It's only it'll live forever as long as the protocol itself is interest is valid as people are interested
Hmm.
in it. I kind of like that aspect. It's more that if there's going to be a death, it's going to be more of a probably like a sudden death. In at least in my, I mean, look, protocols and I'm sure cryptos can die slow deaths, but yeah, there's just something about that. If it's on the chain, and particularly why I like on chain stuff like you do, is there's something more valid to it than giving a fucking flower to a girl.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I wouldn't say I hate other artists selling like receipts or whatever for their stuff on a chain, but like, it's like and there are photographers who like take photos of other people's paintings as their art or whatever. But I think it's really weird or uninteresting to me to like just wholesale bring something else into a new medium and not think about it critically, right? Like Gustav Eiffel, if you're engineering civil thing, like people like what are the characteristics and expressions of like wrought iron, and how do we make something with this material that makes sense,
Mm.
right? So I keep on bringing up Eiffel because I was in Porto, and apparently if you Google Porto, there's this beautiful bridge over the valley, this giant river. It's also designed. You can almost tell immediately when you see it. It's by Gustav Eiffel, the Paris Eiffel Tower guy. And it's just a beautiful bridge, very much in the same kind of language as the Eiffel Tower and whatnot. But like I think figuring out what your materials want to do is an important thing for whether your material is, letters and punctuation making into words for writing, or for oil painting and watercolors, or sculpture, right? Different materials have different characteristics and should be captured. And so for us in the Perfect NFT, code was part of it, yes, but the other part of it that is really pronounced in this is the performative peer-to-peer kind of communication or transactions actually being a part of the piece, right? Because blockchains allow you to send and receive money, economic energy, right, on a blockchain with a bunch of other individuals. And so that is what's kind of making the piece, if that makes sense, right? And it's performing or not performed.
Yeah. Did you write it in did Wout write it in Python?
I think he did it in Crystal, which is
Jeez,
this
never even
other
heard of that.
kind of thing. Yeah, but all the chain is on code, and you can in this renderer NFT, you can check it out. I think the language is what he's done with the standard. I quite like. I will comment on this. I think in some ways the Cardano NFT scene has been held back by its, I would say, almost misunderstanding of the point of like on-chain code or whatever, right? Like there are a group of people who say like unsigs aren't really on chain because there's an IPFS link to the image, right? And it's like, well, yeah, like I do that out of courtesy to Pool PM and other viewers so that they can see the NFT without having to run the code, right? But
Yeah.
code is there, and I would argue, I don't know if we talked about this I think we talked about this at the end of the last talk, but like JavaScript is no more valid code than Python or Crystal or Haskell or anything, right? Like it's all just machine instructions that are text stored on chain. And, as long as there's documentation intrinsic to the thing that allows the output to be reconstructed, it doesn't really matter what language it's in. And part of what I like about what Wout has done, if you look at Tezos and some other generative art scenes, like everyone uses this library called P5JS. It's based off processing, but in JavaScript. And it's just like if you look at a lot of generative art, it's a very popular kind of library to use. And in Cardano land, like we insist that no, you can't use libraries. You have to just write raw JavaScript, and that's the only valid on-chain code. And it's like, really? Because it's kind of arbitrary where you draw that line about what is and isn't valid. And I tend to think that there's a lot of creative people that are making stuff using P5JS, and why wouldn't you meet people where they are and allow these creative kind of people who work with code to create work on your chain, which they can. It's just not well supported in any viewers till now. If you go to the Vector.io website, he basically supports, because it's all just text. You could mint a P5JS NFT on Cardano, and you could have basically what you see on, what is it? FX Hash is the popular one in Tezos. All this generative art could exist on Cardano now, with this standard that he's come up with.
Yeah, well, I've been trying to brush up, and by brush up, I mean actually learn Python. I've actually got a stack of books here, and I'm going to pick one and try and... I've probably read two or three proper kind of Python programming, and it's funnily... I experienced what I was kind of hoping I wouldn't. So like, just for me, I really like language learning. So
I
my
hate
Spanish
language learning.
Yeah.
I like programming learning.
This is funny because my Spanish, I got to a pretty good level, and I'm working on my German also on my book here as my list of like sentences and words and
I want to
verbs
hear
and shit.
your one. No,
What's that?
I want to hear one.
One in German. Ein, ein,
No. Juan.
one. What about him?
I want to hear you say Spanish Juan now. Now that you've told
Oh,
me that
Juan, Juan, Juan,
very
Juan, Juan, Juan Gonzalez. Blah 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 blah.
so you like learning languages and you got Python.
So I was wondering, how different is learning a language, a verbal spoken language, different to a coding programming language? And
I'm hopeless at learning languages. That's all.
yeah, and I think they are very different because I was going through this kind of like textbook algorithms for dummies, and they used a lot of Python in it, and Python's kind of like the just one I chose to start off with. And I know enough to be able to write some real basic things and even experiment with creating my own mini versions of something. And so it was talking about the Fibonacci sequence 1 1 2 3 5 8 13 etc. And I went, well, I should stop here and I should actually try and create this for myself. I think I have enough knowledge of the kind of little things in the background that you can use to get this. And as I was doing it, so I had this kind of like blank canvas, definition. I'll start with like t s equals 0, t equals 1 or something, and then just from 0 and 1 I should be able to create the Fibonacci sequence.
Numbers. Yeah.
Holy fuck, man, I just blanked. I went, what the shit do I do next? And I tried a couple of different things, and this is where I definitely feel like the code is art sort of thing. I know there's so many different ways you can create the Fibonacci sequence using Python, and I just blanked. And this is kind of a recurring theme for me, which is I can't say I've ever had an artistic bent, a creative side to me that I've been able to express well. And this was kind of just a confirmation of it. I had the blank canvas, I had the tools, and I just froze. I just didn't know what to do, which is very different from something like learning German, which for me is, okay, 500 most popular common ones, go through them, write them out, write out sentences you can use. There's just something, there does seem to be a very big difference between learning coding and learning another language, i.e. a spoken language. I feel they're very, very different.
I don't know if this will be useful or not, but I think part of what you're saying that's interesting to me is like it helps to have an output in mind. At the end of the day, a function, one of my favorite definitions for a function is a mapping between one domain and another. It's a little bit abstract. Like you start with this thing and you end up with this thing, and it's like an arrow that connects them. Like give me someone's name, and I will give you back a number, which is the sum of A is equal to 1, B is equal to 2, right? So if you give me Kyrin, I'll calculate what is the sum of your name, right?
K is 13 or something. And
exactly, and go for Y, and that it's just a mapping, right? So if you were to have a definition of you can't really in Python return the Fibonacci sequence because it goes on infinitely, and you'll just run out of memory.
Yeah. So in this case, I was put in FN5 or something, and it would return the
and
fifth
get the
place
first 5, right?
Yeah.
Or the number, right? So that would be the first thing. Either you could make a function which returned a list that was the Fibonacci sequence up to the certain element, right, from 0 and 1 up till like the 100th element or the 1000th element, and then depending on how much RAM you had in your computer, you could run it up to 1,000,000 places or whatever, right? And then you could write another function which said, give me the nth element of that. I mean, you don't have to write a function that does that, right? But if you have that list, you can take it and take the 5th element or the 100th element or the whatever kind of thing, right? But I think the first step is, and as it relates to the artistic practice, which is interesting, is it is a little bit hard to do programming artistically without having an output in mind, which is, I think, what's the interesting part of your question, right? Like there is some kind of spontaneity that happens with this kind of generative process of like, oh, what's come out of it. But like unsigs or the perfect NFT more so than unsigs, like I knew the important parts of what it was before I started coding. And coding was just like putting down on paper like what it needed to be. And I didn't even do the coding, right? Wout did the coding, but like we had this conversation about what it was. It grew, and I think it got better and developed more. But like I'd say like 80% of it is kind of there from the original kind of call that we had, and it was definitely made better by his input and interactions and discussions, like the aesthetics of it, the off-white, beige color of the paper and
Yeah.
and all these kind of things, like or the screen, like I quite like it. um I don't know, all that stuff was the point I'm trying to make is, whereas a language, I think you can learn it. It helps having an express, like what something you want to express in the language. It's
Y-
kind of, I don't know, like swimming or something. Maybe swimming, that's a bad example. Like you can learn how to do it without knowing what you want to do with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
I think it's
Interesting.
hard for a language. It's easier. I mean, most of the people that I know that learned a language were like foreigners in Japan learning Japanese so that they could date Japanese girls.
Yeah, that's a big motivator.
Yeah. So that's a very common one, for and not just Japanese. Like generally speaking, I think romance is a strong motivation to learn a language.
That's how my
Um,
Spanish improved the most, for sure.
yeah,
Just communicating with my ex. Yeah.
yeah. And why is your Spanish still improving, or?
It's no, it's declining. Like it's
Yeah, yeah,
I use it semi frequently because there are a lot of Latinos here, but
yeah,
yes, it's not as strong as I say it probably would have been a year ago.
yeah. So I mean, it's use it or lose it kind of thing. So I understand language, but like human interaction is so spontaneous that like if you have someone to dance with, you just use it, right? And like you'll figure out what you want to say will arrive based on your interactions you're having with the person,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Like you can kind of play it
Hmm.
by ear. Whereas I think in programming, it does help to have like a trajectory in mind. People always tell you like stop reading books and just pick a project,
Hmm.
right? Like have something to do. One
Yeah,
thing, I know, because you said you had a stack of books. The one that I tend to recommend, and it's a free website and a book, is Automate the Boring Stuff.
yeah.
It's
I've
it
seen
is in
this before. Yeah,
Python,
yeah.
and the reason I recommend it is I always say, and I strongly believe that learning programming is not a technically like difficult thing. It's hard, or it's not a problem of like technical understanding. It's
Hmm.
a problem of motivation, is what I say. And that motivation is like, if you can stay motivated to keep learning, you will keep learning. And so automate the boring stuff. The title kind of says what it does, is like how to use Python programming to do like boring shit you don't want to do, like rename a bunch of files or do this kind of like simple tasks in your
Download
office.
all the JSON files from your RSS feed. Hands
Yeah,
up
yeah,
here.
yeah, yeah,
Alter the links in them because those links are now broken to a
yeah, yeah, yeah.
systematic thing that you can do.
Exactly. So,
I have some things that need doing.
yeah. So if you have if you like, it's like, I think I've never read the book, but just looking at the table of contents and the thing, like it gives you stuff that a normal office worker would have to do in their daily life.
Hmm.
And I think that it's very clever because one of the things I did, the first thing times I used programming in my job for an actual task was like the company had just gone bankrupt. Luckily, it was a daughter company of another company, so there was still money to pay us, but it was coming from this parent that was like bailing us out, kind of thing.
Hmm.
And we had to fill out timesheets for 2 months for every day, saying that we had not worked from this time to this time, and it took like 10 minutes to do one day's timesheet,
Yeah.
and we had to do like 60 days of
I'd
timesheets.
say this.
It was like, Jesus, I don't want to spend like 10 minutes because their site was so slow and buggy. So I wrote a little Python script to move the mouse around this shitty website, click the buttons and type the right values into the thing, right? And then I let that run for a day, and I came back and all my timesheets were done.
Yeah.
Right.
Beautiful.
And like, that's the kind of thing that, like, it's not like genius programming, but like, I was very happy that I didn't have to spend a day filling out timesheets, right? Doing this really menial task. And I spent, like 15 minutes writing a little Python script. And so, why I think this book is good is not because it teaches you better. I literally don't know what it says in the book, but the idea that you learn little morsels and snippets that will help you cut boring shit out of your life, I think that will trigger your brain to be like, oh, I should spend time learning how to do this stuff because I don't want to do this shit that I have to do in my life. And by learning this skill, I can have less shit in my life.
Yeah.
Do you get what I'm saying? Like, and so I think that's a pretty powerful incentive to keep studying. Whereas just learning abstract concepts with no way to apply them is difficult.
It's
Right?
similar. It's similar to language learning. When I first started thinking like, oh, maybe I'd want to learn some German, I spent half an hour just writing down all the reasons why I'd maybe want to do it, and I came up with a full kind of list full of them. I don't know where that book is. It's around here somewhere, but it ranged from the absolutely mundane of I really think it sounds cool and I want to sound cool, to I have a bunch of books by Goethe, by Thomas Mann, by a whole I want to read Hermann Hesse in the original German. I think that'd be fucking gangster. Much like I enjoy doing the same with Spanish. And you get a very different experience than what you do getting the translation. It's not it's not categorically different, and that's why you can still have authors transcending beyond their own realm, like Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who was Spanish, Colombian, wrote in Spanish, and he's still recognized in the English world or English speaking world. But there are so many reasons why I want to learn it, and I would have given up a whole ages ago if I didn't have those reasons in mind. So similar sort of thing. So maybe my reasons for Python are just not strong enough yet. And then the other reason with I'm struggling with Python, or struggling is a strong word, why I had that experience maybe was I'm at that stage where it's still I need to put in more hours of learning than it takes to actually do that really boring automative thing. And it's like I still need to put in that upfront cost to get those benefits.
Were those
later.
RSS feed examples? Were you reading off of the table of contents, or those things you actually have to do?
This is stuff I actually have to do. Yeah.
So I just pulled up the table of contents. Chapter 0, introduction, Python basics, flow control, functions list. It goes through a bunch of stuff. And then it says web scraping, working with Excel spreadsheets, working with Google spreadsheets, working with PDF and Word documents, working with CSV files and JSON data.
Nice.
Sending email and text messages, manipulating images, controlling the keyboard and mouse with GUI and automation. So that was like my timesheet thing, right? But like it helps you it gives you a little bit of basics, but then it gets to these things that are like actually, I think it's kind of disingenuous sometimes when people say like pick a project for new programmers, because like there's no project that you can realistically do. Like you can't make an application with Python or whatever and be useful, or write an iOS app. No, it's not going to happen. But Python is kind of generally useful, that you can it acts as kind of glue between other systems.
Yeah.
And you can like get some data from here and put that data into here and fix a bunch of broken links or whatever that are,
I'll go check that out. I definitely need to do that. We were talking about wrought iron before, and I see you've got your gym set up there. We were chatting about that right at the end of the
the last time. I think
how's it been going? Yeah,
I
think
like
you were just getting back into it.
I don't think it had arrived yet, and I love having it. I am working out 3 times a week. I started with 5x5.
Yep.
So starting strength. I think about a month or two ago, I switched to Strongless or the other one at 3x5. Like I just couldn't do 5 sets of 5.
You're doing less.
Yeah,
Nice.
so I'll do 3 sets of 5 now. But I what was it? So squats, overhead press, deadlift, bench press, and rows,
Yeah.
right? And then I'll do pull-ups occasionally, just for fun.
Nice.
But yeah, I got up to a 120 kg squat, a 130 kg deadlift. I can only bench my weight, which is like 80 kgs.
Those are basically my stats. What I can do. Yeah.
So I'm pretty happy. I feel so much better. It's like I don't feel like anything in my life is heavy anymore.
Beautiful.
Like
Yeah.
carrying like 8 bags of groceries in is like, no, not a big deal. We have this big sectional couch that the kids shove like food and everything into the cracks. I basically deadlift the couch from one side so that my wife can like clean up underneath it while I hold the couch. And it used to be, like, hurry up. And now I can just like hold it for like 3 minutes while she,
nice.
sleeps underneath it. I think it's useful to have like a functional level of strength in your life. And what I really like about it is progress. Like when I used to work out in undergrad, I was more like a high reps, try to like look good naked guy, right? Hypertrophy and all this kind of stuff. But like it's kind of a faff. Like I didn't actually like measure my biceps or anything like that, or my chest. So it's very difficult to get like objective results. Like, am I getting better or not? And what I like about focusing on strength training is like, it's like playing an RPG, right? Like you can tell literally your strength stat is going up, right? Like either the weight or the reps or, something is moving.
You're still in the beautiful zone where the reps go up relatively consistently. Yeah, that's the.
Well, I've kind of plateaued because it's. I think I started in September and it's now March, so it's been like
that's about 6 months. Nice.
So it was slapping 2.5 kgs on every time doing 5x5, and then it's like, nah, we'll take that down to 3.5.
For sure. Yeah.
But there is one book. I think we talked about Mishima Yukio, or one author.
We did
last time.
I read The Sound of Waves after that. Yeah. I think I liked the Sailor Who Fell from Grace more.
Yeah.
I still need to read some of the others. I read actually a couple other Japanese works. One was The Courage to Be Disliked. It's more like a kind of self-help book.
Yeah.
And who else did I read? Oh man.
I recommend Dazai Osamu, Ningen Shikaku, which is No Longer Human.
Man. Yeah, that's definitely in my list. Yeah,
a good one. Another suicide book. But I was gonna take it to this. There's another book called it's nonfiction. I read in undergrad by Antonio Damasio. I think he's like Italian American neuroscientist.
Yeah,
and it's called Descartes' error. Like the mistake of Descartes, right? Cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am.
Yeah.
It's like, no, like it's almost like the dumbest shit in Western civilization is like, you are a brain and then the rest of this stuff happens. Like, no, like your brain is part of a nervous system. Your nervous system, you talk about like neuromuscular activation, right? Like, as it relates to starting strength, like so much what I've understood of like newbie gains, part of it is like you're getting physically more muscle, but not really. Actually, what you're learning is like strength is a skill.
Yeah,
and
it's like the
you're learning
to
recruit your muscles, right? In this thing, and you're getting better muscle recruitment and all this kind of stuff, and learning how to signal fibers contract, right?
Yeah.
Because like if you think about it logically, you can't put on muscle really at more than like half a kg a month or whatever it is without steroids and all this kind of stuff. And so that's more about the output side. But what Descartes is saying, like, it's not the matrix. Like you can't just be this brain in a vat which is like floating around, and like you need rich sensory input in order to be like a fully formed functioning human being, right? And I think being there, it's kind of interesting. Aesthetics like in art, one definition I've kind of heard is like being located in like a physical space and time and being like keenly aware of it is like a definition of aesthetic experience,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like when you're in front of a
Yeah.
painting or a sculpture or here, like, and you're like, I'm fucking here, like, wow, like it kind of like pulls you into experiencing the thing, right? um and I think that's kind of similar to like, I think being aware of one's body and like how it navigates time and space, and being able to kind of master that in a way, or take a little bit of control over that, is kind of very useful in terms of helping you think more clearly or better.
Yeah, man, there's getting right into that kind of paradox thing, and then I've read another book called Reality Plus real recently, which was examining, I guess, Descartes' um, cogito ergo sum, and then just talking about how that applies to maybe virtual reality, or are we living in a simulation, all those sorts of things. Very kind of philosophical book,
Mm.
and arguing what is real. Is virtual reality real? Is that reality? And he makes all sorts of claims, and essentially it's yes, all of them are a reality, and if you are in it, it is a reality. And the thing about philosophy is it does get into these word games and language games, which are very subjective, and there is something very, very appealing and nice about some heavy weights. Can you lift the weight?
I think it's Karl Marx. It probably isn't. It's probably misappropriate. Philosophy is to the real world. Do you know the next line?
No, I don't know off the top of my head now.
So philosophy is to the real world as masturbation is to sex.
Yeah, nice. Yes.
Like,
Okay. Yeah.
it's like a very good, like, I used to like philosophy and this kind of thing, and but yeah, I think there's something very present. Like I remember, even though I didn't work out effectively in undergrad, when I always tell any of my depressed friends, just go lift some weights. I think it's very hard to be depressed if
Yeah.
you develop weightlifting as like a routine. Like it's just like so uh like clearing the cobwebs, and I think so
Agreed.
much of modern life being weird is, I'm not like a paleo diet guy, but like fundamentally we were designed or evolved to like run around the Serengeti plains and like chase down gazelle and then like eat them, right?
Yeah.
And sedentary office life is just so out of whack with what our whole like bodily systems are designed to do. And so, yeah, lifting weights is probably not the very good approximation of that, but it's a good way of simulating that behavior in a concentrated time. I hate cardio. I can't like run on a treadmill for 60 minutes. It's like mind-numbingly boring.
Yeah.
And so I like I could do like intensity, like sprint training, right? High interval or something like that, and get my heart rate up that way. But I hate like long, dull, like same intensity kind of thing. And so weights are just fun because they're heavy and um,
Yeah.
they
Well,
allow you to concentrate work
yeah.
into a short time and period, right? And
This
they can
this
get
this podcast goes into. I mean, it's kind of a catch-all one, and which is why I like chatting with you, because we can just go down on all sorts of different
everything.
routes.
Yeah.
But I usually put it under the kind of philosophy section in if for the categorization that it
Yeah.
needs, that podcasts
Mhm.
need. But with that being said, you look at Juan, who is just this fucking human boulder ball because he has lifted insane
Mhm.
weights all his life, and that's what suits him. And then me, which is with handstands, it's not the muscle.
Are you a calisthenics guy?
Calisthenics slash hand balancing. It's probably like
Yeah.
80% hand balancing, and
Mhm.
I'm trying to get the one arm handstand at the moment, which is just this stupidly unnecessary skill. Or, but it's almost like the most realist thing I can do if and when, and it's a
Mhm.
when I get it. It is just like it's so real to me that I can fucking do this
Like a
thing.
measurable thing that like. going from
Correct.
two hands
And
to
and
one,
it's
my whole body weight is supported down my one arm, and
yeah, it's just an achievement which I don't think would be comparable with any of the philosophical understand. Like I feel like I learn more by doing that in non a non-intellectual way than I can get from any philosophy book. But it's nice to have both of them. Hence the
is it
paradox
a
of life.
strength thing or a balance thing or both? Like,
It's
can you do a? Is it similar to doing like a one-armed pull-up? Like, if you could do that,
no.
can you?
It's more I was saying it's probably more 80% kind of the skill, neurons and stuff in the brain firing at the right time.
Stabilizers and
All
whatever
like
reaction time.
a little bit of it is strengthening of the actual tendons of joints
Uh-huh.
and just sheer pushing force. But
Uh-huh.
I feel most of it's a skill based thing because
How to
you
feel
can
and adjust your like internal
yeah
gyroscope
because
and
like the typical once generally what I've heard from kind of coaches and people who are at this Cirque du Soleil type level is to get a one arm handstand you need to get to a pretty decent level of two arms. That'll usually take a couple of years, and then the general next step to just get like the basic 5-10 seconds on a one arm is like another 3 years. Your muscle mass and all that sort of stuff, it doesn't increase. Like nothing really changes in your body in those 3 years. It's at least I feel, and I'm probably about halfway through that. It's just straight up shit in your brain needs to start working in a different way.
interesting.
But yeah,
But yeah, that's kind of related to what we were just saying, like the rewiring or like being present and being able to sense from instant to instant the kind of micro adjustments you need to calibrate your body to stand up, right? Like, and not overcompensate and overshoot. Because that's what happens when I try to handstand, right? Like I just tip over because
yeah.
oh, I'm wobbling that way, go back the other way. Oh, but way too much, right? And so it's just like you topple down. But it's interesting.
But that's why I love it. It's I mean that's my kind of philosophy to life is to not be too stuck in my own head. It's to get out and do things, and that's that it makes me think clearer as well. The worst I've ever thought, and the most, funnily enough, depressed and susceptible to bad ideas was when I was working at a mine. I was on the awful roster, which was changing from day shift to night shift every 3 or 4 days. I was not working out or
Graveyard
doing
shifts
any
are weird.
exercise. Yeah, everything was
Anyone
fucked up.
I've ever talked to about like not getting sun, right? You think I think
Yes,
it's still
correct.
getting sleep.
Yeah.
It's like no, it kind of fucks you up. And like a great example of like we're just monkeys, we're apes. That's why they're so popular in the NFTs, right?
Yeah,
and like
cycling all the way around.
you need to sun your balls and all that kind of stuff, right?
Oh man, I love wacky people. There's so many crazy shit out there.
I got to admit, man, like when I started hearing about that stuff, I'm like, that sounds like a good idea. I bet that would feel good going out to sun your balls. Like,
get like a magnifying glass for extra vitamin D. Have you seen the guy who hits his own balls and like breathes? Oh man, I'll send you.
Sounds like a different kind of video.
I'll send you this thing. It is the fucking hilarious.
Okay, that sounds like an interesting watch. I'll check it out.
Oh man, dude, it's a pleasure chatting with you.
Always,
definitely do it again. If you want
coming to Portugal anytime soon.
What's that? Like I said, man, I'm
soon?
probably Europe next year. Is kind of what I'm thinking. So I definitely
sure to
come
stop
up.
by Lisbon.
I 100% will.
Or whatever. And
yep.
I don't know if I'll be in Lisbon still, but I should be in Portugal. So.
We'll make something happen sometime.
Yeah.
You're definitely one of those internet friends I want to catch up with in real life at some point. If people
high quality conversations.
Yeah, man. Yeah. If people are interested, want to find out more about you, about Unsig's Perfect NFT, where do you want to direct them to?
Right now, it's the perfectnft.art.
Still a good chance it'll be going on as this is released. So, if you're feel like degenning in, or if you and the opposite, you feel like owning a piece of art.
Connoisseur.
Yeah.
Yeah. If it's the first one, fuck you. If it's the second one, welcome. Either way.
I love it, man. I love it. All right, dude. Have a
Cheers, man.
great day, and yeah, we'll chat soon.